School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. We got a World War III alert. The war with Iran could happen any day now. Might be happening right now. Before we get into that, let's be sure to wipe your feet. That means you hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, Trump is a puppet and the small hats want their war. Let's get into the content. Salute.
Tensions are gradually escalating. Currently, the U.S. fleet, warships led by the USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72, is sailing towards the Arabian Sea. This war machine is unlikely to just head to the Arabian Sea for a stroll. Sources indicate a possible arrival window of January 22 to 24, 2026. Something big is being planned on Iran. The aircraft carrier group reportedly lost contact, turned off ice while sailing west from the Indo-Pacific through the Strait of Malacca on January 19, and will arrive in the Arabian Sea in approximately 6 days, amid rising regional tensions in the Middle East. The U.S. military is rapidly moving additional fighter aircraft, ships, air defense assets, and support assets to the region, will reach a point near Iran's southern coast in the Gulf of Oman. The USS Abraham Lincoln can stay at sea for over 20 years without refueling, is 1,092 feet long, can accommodate at least 70 jets, and can launch at 150 miles per hour in just 2 seconds. This again clearly demonstrates the lack of unity in the region, making things very easy for the U.S. As in the AI footage, Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps have stated they are fully prepared to destroy the aircraft carrier, its B-52 bomber and F-35, in the event of a potential conflict with the United States and Israel. However, several U.S. aircraft carriers present in the Red Sea some time ago had to return home due to operations by the Ansarallah forces of the Yemeni Armed Forces in Sana'a.
The American administration has been deploying more and more forces towards the Iranian region in preparation for a strike. It wasn't only the Abraham Lincoln super striker carrier group, but also other destroyers, other fighter jets, and more deployments inside of the West Asian slash Middle East region. More deployment was coming from the United Kingdom under the pretext of, or under the excuse of, defensive measures, deploying more forces to Qatar. Now there are more movements internally from multiple countries in the Gulf moving to Qatar. However, all of these countries, or most of them to say the least, said that they will not be allowing the United States to use their territories to participate in an attack against Iran. Israel so far has been trying to take itself slightly outside of the picture. Previous reports said that Benjamin Netanyahu told the American administration not to attack Iran now because Israel is not in optimal conditions, especially to do with their air defense systems and their preparations internally. Iran landed huge blows against the genocide state in the 12-day war following the Israeli aggression against Iran. And towards the final days of the war, The Israeli air defenses were not working whatsoever. Everything was landing, and Iran was succeeding in completely shutting down Israel. Now, there are many things that are developing very rapidly and very quickly, but one of the most important things that happened in the past several hours was something very, very abrupt, something that took place immediately and very abruptly. It was the cancellation of multiple flights to Israel. Multiple countries were headed to Israel, and then all of a sudden, some of them made a U turn immediately, whilst others canceled scheduled flights. This was one of the first reports that came in relation to this matter, speaking about Western airlines canceling flights as Turkey warns of Israeli strike plans against Iran. The warning came in particular from the Turkish foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, who said that it was actually Israel that is likely to attack Iran. In other words, more likely than the United States of America. However, these flight cancellations weren't necessarily directly linked to that statement, but most likely to certain developments on the ground. Usually, when countries cancel flights, they have information that is very solid. We're talking about U turns. U turns, they were on the way towards Israel, then all of a sudden, they're doing a U turn. You don't do that unless there is solid information coming from your country, from official channels within the country, that something imminent is about to happen. And that country that the flights are going to is either going to be participating in an attack or will be facing an attack, which could also mean that it might be a preemptive strike coming from Iran. We're going to share the maps of the satellite and flight radar images of the airspace of Israel. But before that, let's get into this report that is speaking about this development. Major international carriers abruptly canceled dozens of flights to Israel and Gulf destinations on January 23rd. When they're speaking about the Gulf destinations, they're talking about the UAE and Saudi Arabia primarily, indicating that the risk is going to encompass all of the region. Grounding routes, as Turkey's foreign minister warned that Israel continues seeking opportunities to strike Iran. KLM, Royal Dutch Airlines, Air France, British Airways, Lufthansa, and Swiss International Airlines all suspended operations to Tel Aviv, with some carriers also halting service to Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The cancellations began late Thursday evening GMT and extended through the weekend, affecting travelers across Europe and North America. Air Canada canceled 4 flights scheduled to land in Israel on Friday, while United Airlines similarly suspended its services to the country. The coordinated nature of the disruption suggested airlines were responding to shared intelligence assessments about regional security risks. So we're talking about official channels speaking about this attack or potential attack, imminent development, and therefore that led to these airlines taking these moves that are very abrupt and signal something very big. They did not cancel flights during the peak threats coming from Donald Trump. They did not cancel flights when the United States was deploying more fighter jets to the region. They're canceling flights abruptly now, although technically we don't have, or we don't see now, an imminent sign now that an attack is about to happen, which again signals that they're receiving information that something is about to happen. Now, this began with the threat, or according to this report, they are relating it to the warning that came from the Turkish foreign minister, although again, we're talking about intelligence information here. What did the Turkish foreign minister say, Hakan Fidan? Speaking to Turkish broadcaster NTV on Friday, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan cautioned that Israel maintains its intent to launch military action against Tehran despite potential consequences for regional security. Quote, I hope they find a different path, but the reality is that Israel in particular is looking for an opportunity to strike Iran. And quote, Fidan said, when asked whether this assessment applied to both the United States and Israel, Fidan clarified that Israel specifically was seeking such an opportunity, indicating that it's Israel more than the United States that is looking to attack Iran, despite all of the deployment coming from the United States, and Israel trying to act like they're not the interested party to begin this attack. However, there is no denying that the United States will be taking part in all of this, because no action happens in the region at that scale without the approval, blessing, and support of the United States, if we're talking about an Israeli attack or any of the American allies' moves inside the region. They continued, the comments come as Ankara seeks to play a more direct military and diplomatic role across the Middle East as tensions between Israel and Iran escalate through proxy conflicts and direct confrontations. Ben Gurion Airport in Israel saw all international operations grounded until at least Friday morning, according to reports from the facility. Israeli flag carrier El Al suspended operations indefinitely, while domestic flights within Israel were also halted. KLM specifically canceled its next 2 overnight flights to Israel and extended the suspension through Sunday, while also cutting routes to Dubai and Saudi Arabian destinations. Air France canceled 2 incoming flights to Dubai, along with its Tel Aviv services, citing heightened regional tensions. British Airways canceled its evening flight to Dubai. The Lufthansa Group, which includes Swiss International Airlines and Austrian Airlines, had already reduced its Israel operations to daytime-only flights in recent weeks before joining the broader suspension. And they're talking about security assessments driving these airlines' decisions. Airlines typically avoid canceling flights without substantial cause, as the financial and operational costs are significant. This confirms what we've been speaking about in relation to the sudden halt that usually does not happen unless these airlines have substantial evidence that something imminent is about to happen. The simultaneous decisions by multiple major carriers suggested access to credible threat assessments that prompted precautionary measures. Israeli airspace was reported largely empty on Thursday evening as carriers avoided the area. One passenger traveling from Amsterdam to Tel Aviv reported their KLM flight was canceled and noted that most European airlines were suspending service, forcing a switch to El Al. Before that, carrier also suspended operations. The fact that El Al is suspending operations, by the way, gives this whole story an additional layer, an additional level. Why? Because El Al has been supported by the Israeli government to cover all insurance costs and get support to operate during war and during threats, to a level where sometimes some of the passengers recorded missiles landing while they were on the flight, or air defense systems being activated, suggesting the level of risk that the Israeli airlines were taking. Now that they're canceling it too, that signals something huge is about to happen, not only from outside of Israel, but also from within Israel. The tensions between Israel and Iran have intensified through both proxy conflicts and direct military confrontations in recent years. They continued down with this article. So what did the map exactly look like? This is how it looked like. This is the point where some of the airlines were doing U-turns. the whole airspace is empty. We can see some movements across Israel, but these airlines were confirmed to be doing a U turn here. Likewise, with the other flights as well. Then we had more countries starting to cancel all of their flights to and from Israel, and also other countries close in the region, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE and other countries too. Now, the United Kingdom sent more fighter jets to the region. They're deploying more. And the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom said that the Royal Air Force is deploying to the area for defensive purposes. Defensive for what exactly? I mean, you can assess exactly what kind of defensive measures we're talking about here. Then there were more moves coming from the United States, reports that an air bridge being formed from Florida, California, and other locations in the United States to the United Kingdom and to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Fighter jets and C-17 transport aircraft being transferred to Muwaffaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, while refueling aircraft are heading to Al Udaid base in Qatar. These are also additional moves being taken by the United States of America and its allies, apart from the moves that have been reported to be taking place from Israel. All of these are significant and substantial moves that indicate that an imminent attack is about to happen against Iran. Now, from an Iranian perspective, they have been making more clarifications about their position. One of them is that any attack against Iran will be stretched to outside of the Iranian borders. Number two, Safavi, one of the leading figures in the military establishment inside of Iran, said that the next battle will shape the destiny of the region. We're talking about levels of threats coming and also intensifying from Iran. We also heard about reports of 16 Chinese planes landing in Iran in the course of 56 hours just several days back. Also, more reports about Russian support to Iran, whether it's to do with electronic warfare, radar systems, and any sort of equipment that they need to thwart any attack against Iran. However, all of these indications are showing that this level of action and these moves coming from these countries to cancel everything to the region, not only to Israel, but to other countries too, so abruptly, including the Israeli airlines that usually remain operational up until the last second, show that we could well be seeing an attack happening imminently, even within the next few hours, against Iran.
They're going to try to go in hard as they did in Venezuela, knock out Iran's communication systems, knock out its air defenses, and then move in from there. But that does not guarantee regime change. Iran is not Venezuela. They are now demanding a decapitation strike on Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as a kind of consolation prize.
Max Blumenthal just warned that a U.S.-Israeli strike on Iran is imminent, despite what we've been told about a stand down, that Trump and Netanyahu are still planning to strike, and it will probably happen soon. He gets into why he believes this, what his sources from the ground in Iran are telling him about it, and how he thinks it's going to play out. So let's catch that. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Even though this regime change, which I guess was intended to replicate the coup of 1953, failed, just as regime change apparently has failed in Venezuela, is an Israeli and U.S. Attack on Iran imminent?
Well, I saw these riots as an extension of the 12-day war, as an effort to revive the hostility toward Iran after the war that was launched by Israel essentially failed, and Trump declared kind of a symbolic victory by bombing Fordo. But that was a way of giving Israel a climb down, because Israel was getting hammered and its cities and strategic sites were getting hit. The reason that Trump did not immediately strike, there was this national security meeting about a week ago, and apparently the Israelis said, "We're not ready yet for you to go in and strike, because our missile defenses are not prepared, and we need you to set up Patriot batteries, to set up the THAAD anti-missile defense systems, because we can't defend ourselves with those Patriot batteries that you paid for." So there was a delay. They sent carrier groups. There are over 100 in-air stratotankers, in-air refueling stratotankers in the region now. All the assets are in place. They kind of, today was the day they were put in place. And yesterday at Davos, Peter Orszag, who I think was Treasury Secretary under Obama, former Goldman Sachs banker, he's at some new firm. His wife is a overtly Zionist CNN host. He said that he's hearing through, in his words, indirect sources, that the U.S. will strike Iran soon.
Yeah, it seems to be the case, and I'm with Max. This just seems to be the latest phase of a grand propaganda scheme to undermine the Iranian regime that we've been hearing all along. At first, it was, Israel's just attacking Iran. They're in their backyard. They're a threat to them. We're not getting involved. And then in the 12-day war, it's like, no, we are getting involved. We're giving them intelligence and weaponry. Then we are bombing Iran. It's just for their nuclear facilities, they told us, even though Tulsi Gabbard had said in her annual threat summary, they didn't even reconstitute their nuclear weapons program. And ironically, Iran has nuclear weapons. But either way, the United States bombed Iran, bailed Israel out because apparently they had depleted their supplies. Iranian ballistic missiles were getting through the Iron Dome, and they were unprepared to continue fighting. Well, I kind of like that because Trump celebrated this. We set them back decades, he said. We set back their nuclear program decades. But then he shifted it to, when talking with Netanyahu around New Year's Eve, he said, well, if they rebuild their ballistic missiles, that's reason for us to strike. If they kill protesters, that's reason to strike. And then just the other day, he said, if they try anything, they're going to be struck. And Max is right. They moved in all sorts of assets into the region. I think this attack is going to happen sooner rather than later.
And I think the inertia is so strong, the preponderance of pressure from Israel on Donald Trump, who they essentially own through Miriam Adelson, to do something, that Trump is going to try some kind of decapitation strike. And that's what all the Iranian monarchist psychos who are now frustrated that their crown prince, or what I would call the Potomac, Maryland-based clown prince, Reza Pahlavi, is not going to be sent back into Tehran to take power. Trump has poured cold water on that. They are now demanding a decapitation strike on Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as a kind of consolation prize. And honestly, I can't think of anything that the U.S. can do militarily that will actually lead towards regime change, unless they do something like that, and he will be quickly replaced. But that's where I see, through my indirect sources,
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how any regime change takes place unless there's lots of well armed rebels willing to storm Tehran and take the regime in conjunction with the bombing, or you have boots on the ground, the most horrifying prospect that no American patriot wants, because we've experienced those regime change operations in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and our military stretched thin and causing 5 million total deaths in the war on terror and $12 trillion down the drain on that for the sake of Israel in many of these affairs in Syria and Libya, Iraq. I mean, obviously, there were neocons in the United States that had pushed for that even before 9/11 and finally got all the political capital they needed to unleash that. But now we have the same possibility here on the table. It's just a terrifying prospect for men and women in our military to go overseas for the sake of the Israeli genocidal regime to do another regime change when Iran isn't even a threat to the United States. Totally unacceptable. It cannot be accepted, but it does seem like it might happen soon.
The momentum going.
You know, Chris, let's play Orzag, the former Treasury Secretary, now the head of one of the big banks, private banks, revealing what his inside sources have told him. And as you listen to this, correct me if I'm wrong, Max. Actually, before we play it, Chris, because it's on my mind now, didn't most of the Arab countries in the region deny the United States permission to fly over their airspace? Isn't that why the carriers are there?
Supposedly, the Qataris denied the U.S. the ability to launch strikes on Iran from Al Udeid Air Base. We'll see how far that gets them. It's not as though Trump is asking for anybody's permission now.
Yeah, I mean, Israel can bomb Qatar in Doha, and that seems to be fine to still preserve the Qatari United States relationship. And we all know the reason why the United States has its biggest airbase in Qatar is to protect Israel. They just decided to play ball. For all this idea that it's Qatari propaganda, they sure are complicit with Israel and the United States and doing whatever they want there in that region. They can't make much of a fuss of it unless they want to get into the crosshairs of US and Israel.
Almost as if he sees the entire region as a Buffalo Bills cheerleader. But the only country that's fully on board with these strikes is...
You said Donald Trump sees the whole region as a Buffalo Bills cheerleader? I can't with Max sometimes, man. He'll insert the funniest humor in the most random places, and it just gets me every single time, man.
The United Arab Emirates, which has been fully integrated into Greater Israel. The Saudis don't want it, and they're lobbying Trump against it. The Turkish government do not want it. Qatar absolutely does not want it because they see how potentially destabilizing it will be. And Iranian military sources are indicating that this time they will do deliberate damage to the global economy if they come under attack, especially if there are these decapitation strikes, and there will be havoc on the financial markets. And it's going to start with this, Saudi oil platforms. There could be a migration wave where Turkey will face a border problem. None of them want this, and they told Trump, "Do not do this." But it's what Israel wants that matters.
It sure is. Doesn't that just say it all? When we're talking about the hierarchy of concerns or allies, it's always what Israel wants, even above our own interests, the interests of the American people that want to maybe have their own government serving them for once instead of this foreign regime. Another thing Max was talking about in regard to U.S.-Saudi relations, I want to add to that, actually. The United States actually finalized a deal to send F-35 bombers over to Saudi Arabia for the first time late last year. It's something that much of the media isn't reporting, but it's also potentially intertwined into this plot to arm Iran's enemies against Iran for a possible, remember, new strike, an imminent strike that could happen. It's not being talked about a lot, but in addition to the U.S. moving the USS Abraham Lincoln, carrier, battle strike group, F-15s, F-22s, their own F-35s, they've also given the F-35s to Saudis. So all this could play a role in what's to come soon.
Chris, number 19.
I think it's very likely that over the next few days there will be something that happens in Iran. And
You
it might
do?
be something big, yes.
Why do you think that?
I did, well, from a variety of different, indirect information, and also to your point, I think it's entirely possible the United States was waiting for the carriers to arrive.
Was waiting for them.
For the carriers to arrive.
And that this is just so that the Greenland story
Well,
is just a head fake.
I don't know about a head fake, but it has the effect of it has that effect, even if that's not the intent.
And that would mean what? How does that play out if that's actually the case?
Then the big question becomes, can you actually do regime change through effectively a bombing campaign? And I don't think we have any history in which that's effective, but we'll see. It depends what the objective.
Yeah, I'm not any fan of any Goldman Sachs banker, I'll tell you that. And that's an understatement, but I think that's actually right. There aren't many historical examples, if any, tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, of a regime change being finalized, coming to fruition without some form of boots on the ground, whether it's an internal revolt, armed rebellion, revolt, just through bombing. I don't think that's possible. And it's certainly not possible in Tehran, if you ask me.
Of what happens is, if it's to take out the ballistic missiles, that can be successful. If it's regime change, that's got a more checkered history.
Does he even know what he's talking about? The United States can take out Iranian ballistic missiles?
They'll try to attack ballistic missile launching sites and do missile suppression attacks, but that's not the only weapon in Iran's arsenal that can do damage. And we haven't seen the full breadth or depth of Iran's ballistic missile arsenal at all. We did not see that in the 12-day war. It will be an intense few days if the U.S. strikes. They're going to try to go in hard, as they did in Venezuela, knock out Iran's communication systems, knock out its air defenses, and then move in from there. But that does not guarantee regime change. Iran is not Venezuela. It has a percentage of its population that's willing to fight and die to defend the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, I think that's key. It doesn't guarantee regime change. No matter how many bombs you drop on them, there's no sense that that will just innately cause an organic regime change. In fact, it's probably going to galvanize the populace behind the regime there. Why wouldn't it? That would happen in the United States. That would happen to anyone that's nationalistic and wants a sense of self-preservation. Not everyone connects with their government in that way, but a hell of a lot of the populace certainly does. And, he mentioned that we haven't seen the breadth of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. I think that's true to an extent. It doesn't seem like, from the information I've gathered, that they really fired their full array of their best stuff against Israel in the 12-day war, but also their cruise missiles, which are often not talked about. They could pelt and do a lot of damage with the cruise missile systems that a lot of Americans and Israelis haven't seen yet either.
And what Orzag is suggesting is the U.S. would have to do boots on the ground. The American public has no appetite for that. And let's also consider Iran defeated the hybrid warfare tactics that were just deployed against it very handily and very quickly. Once the internet was taken out, the violence in Iran's cities stopped. The coordinated violence immediately stopped because the leaders of these riot cells could no longer get their instructions from abroad.
Right.
Just getting them through secret signal groups. They were getting them through Israeli-backed international satellite channels like Iran International, which is like one of the main PSYOP sources for the Iranian public. They also knocked out Elon Musk's Starlink, which was being smuggled in by U.S. intelligence in the tens of thousands. And this was supposed to be the workaround after the internet blackout. They wiped it out, apparently with Russian cooperation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that Max said there that I most am happy for, most encouraged by, is that there's no appetite among the American people for U.S. boots on the ground in Iran for a regime change on behalf of Israel. After all we've been through the past few decades of my lifetime, with all the spilled blood for nothing, for these regime change operations that result in, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, expenditures of over trillions in dollars to replace the Taliban with the Taliban in Afghanistan, over 20 years, 4 presidents. That's what we get. That encourages me. However, of course, the banks and military industrial complex and Israel lobby doesn't exactly care about what the average appetite of the American people are in terms of putting US soldiers in harm's way. They might be willing to do that anyway. And that is a horrifying thing. Now, hopefully they lack the political capital to get away with it. I just hope that they do lack that capital.
And so I think whoever was seeking to instrumentalize these protests as a form of hybrid war against Iran underestimated the country's military and security forces, just as Israel underestimated Iran when it launched its unprovoked attack in June of last year. They killed major commanders in the IRGC. Like they killed the IRGC commander who designed the True Promise operations, Hajizada. They killed Bagheri, who was in charge of like overseeing transit, like a government transition, and was a legendary figure. And within about 8 hours, Iran's leader Khamenei replaced all of his commanders, and Iran launched a massive ballistic missile volley that did serious damage to Israel and had Netanyahu on the back foot within 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah, the United States and Israel have tried everything under the sun to try to enact regime change. And this is just the latest phase. They've tried to take out Soleimani, tried to decapitate the regime during the 12-day war while they were telling the American public, hey, we're just in this to take out their nuclear enrichment process, their nuclear weapon facilities. That's why we're there. Well, you had the Israelis working hand in hand with the United States, calling their top officials in the government and saying, hey, turn over your arms or your family are going to be in trouble. They wanted regime change during that affair. If you don't think that, you're living in la la land. You're not facing reality, because this one is the one that they've always wanted. And they always will push for it no matter what. You can see how the goalposts have moved, where anything they do, as Trump said, they try anything, will wipe them off the face of the planet. He said that. That's in a clip. It went from we're taking out their nuclear weapon facilities to they try anything, they're wiped off the face of the earth. And all of the things, you can take away all the rhetoric, all the argumentation, all the propaganda we're given, but they're actually moving all the military assets they would need to continue a strike into the region. And that's what concerns me most. Now, what I fear the most is a false flag attack by Israel or the United States, or a combination of the two, that does damage to U.S. forces and then is blamed on the Iranians as the generating element that will allow for a regime change operation with boots on the ground. That's the most concerning thing. I think a lot of us in the dissident world, the anti-war, non-interventionist world, are fearing that most of all. And I just hope and pray that does not come to fruition. The last thing we need is another regime change on behalf of Israel. And just any Israel first policy, our money going down the drain to this regime while they kill Palestinians indiscriminately. Even during a ceasefire, they do that in the hundreds of numbers. And if you don't believe me on that reporting, go over to antiwar.com. Dave DeCamp reports on that all the time. It's been over 500 Palestinians, I believe, at this point since the ceasefire ended that they've killed. And there's no sense that the Israel murder spree is going to end. They want to expand their West Bank settlements into Syria and Lebanon even further than they are now. And they want to destabilize the Iranian regime to possibly do the same there. They will not stop. And the U.S. just needs to get out of this. Bring our troops home. Stop funding this rogue regime. Stop funding any regime. You tell me. I wish we would stop funding X country. I'll agree with you. Every country other than our own. It's too much. We can't handle it. We need to get out of these stupid entangling alliances. Same thing with the proxy war versus Russia. But what do you guys think? Do you think Max is right? Is an attack imminent between the U.S. and Israel against Iran? Is that going to come soon? Are all the indications showing that? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel.
Clearest indication yet about his intention to engage his country into yet another illegal war, this time with Iran. to serve his Israeli masters. Trump was speaking to US media representatives on Thursday on his way back from Davos to the US. This was the first time that Trump acknowledged the movement of US warships, yes, not one or two ships, but several warships heading towards Iran. This was a sign that Trump had made up his mind to attack Iran, even if it meant his abandoning of his election promise to not drag the US military in any more military attacks on countries around the world.
Things stand with Iran. The U.S. has got sizable military assets.
You know, we have a lot of ships going that direction, just in case. We have a big flotilla going in that direction, and we'll see what happens. We have a big force going toward Iran. I'd rather not see anything happen, but we're watching them very closely. I saw 837 hangings on Thursday. They would have been dead. Every one of them would have been hung. This is like from 1,000 years ago. This is an ancient culture. Very smart people, by the way, but it's an ancient culture. 837, mostly young men, were going to be hung on Thursday. And I said, if you hang those people, you're going to be hit harder than you've ever been hit. It'll make what we did to your Iran nuclear look like peanuts. And an hour before this horrible thing was going to take place, they canceled it. And they actually said they canceled it. They didn't postpone it. They canceled it. So that was a good sign. But we have an armada. We have a massive fleet heading in that direction. And maybe we won't have to use it. We'll see.
You said would you like the supreme leader to step down or to go into exile?
Right now. I don't want to get into that, but they know what we're looking.
You said today that they want
There's a lot of killing going on.
You said today they want to talk and we'll talk. So if you set something up and they asked you to,
I would. But you know, we've talked to them a lot. They should have made a deal before we hit them with the nuclear, because we really that was a devastating hit. That whole area is out of play. And if they try to do it again, they're going to have to go to another area. We'll hit them there too, just as easily, much more easily. Because that was very advanced. They were building that for 10 years, and they'd have to start anew. So you know, that was a total obliteration.
Are you still planning to go ahead with those terrorists that you had mentioned on the secondary terrorists, those affected by businesses in Iran, the 25% tariffs?
I am doing that, yeah. We're doing that.
Many within the American establishment feel that it's only a matter of time before Trump carries out deadly military strikes on Iran. A former member of the Obama administration recently told an American news media outlet that Trump was only waiting for US warships to arrive in the region and take position. This was another expert on CNN a few days ago.
With us now, Trita Parsi. He's the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and author of several books on Iran, including Losing an Enemy. Great to see you, Trita. So I'm wondering, what do you make of the president's comments that he is holding off on military action against Iran for now?
Well, I think he's speaking the truth there. He is holding it off for now. We're seeing significant troop movements in which a lot of assets are being brought to the region, and almost all U.S. bases in the region are being emptied out. We saw the same pattern back in June when he did strike, but at an even greater scale. And much suggests that what happened a couple of days ago when Trump was on the precipice of war and then decided not to do it is a realization that this would actually be much, much tougher than what he initially thought, and as a result needs much more military assets. But what we're looking at and what we're moving towards, unless something breaks, is a major military confrontation between the United States and Iran.
The fact that Western media outlets too have intensified its propaganda shows that the attack on Iran could be imminent. This is Sky News interviewing a so-called London-based comedian of Zoroastrian Iranian background. But see how he is allowed to peddle fake news of epic proportions without being challenged to substantiate his imaginary claims with solid evidence.
The internet is shut down. We can't see what's going on inside Iran. What's your sense of what's happening right now?
Well,
whenever this happens, whenever there's a crackdown, all of us who have a bit of a platform who are in the Iranian diaspora, we give over our Instagram and our Twitter over to the people who are voiceless. They shut everything down. And right now, based on a CNN report, there's a 1% connectivity, mainly through Elon Musk's Starlink satellites. And even those have been jammed. And so that's what I do. That's why I'm here, to give people a proper indication of what I've gathered is going on. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump was told by the regime that the killings have stopped, they're stopping, it's all stopped, executions have stopped. That is definitely not the case. The killings have continued. Mostly the regime have brought in foreign militia from Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, the former Iraqi deputy prime minister has just said Iraqi terrorist groups have gone in and massacred 12,000 people. They should be brought to account, and this is a heinous crime. The executions have continued apace, and the way they're doing it is protesters have been gathered and they've been put into detention centers. And we understand there are no trials. Some of these young people who are just 18 and were peacefully protesting are now drugged. There's one report we heard they've been drugged and have been asked to sign things that they killed a policeman, and they are executed behind the detention centers. This is going on at a pace. And there's also now a worry of chemical weapons being used.
Well, yes. Tell us a little bit more about that. I mean, where is that report coming from, that suggestion coming from?
I saw that at the European Union. Somebody mentioned it like as if it was an absolute fact that they're using chemical weapons on the people of Iran. Now, that is a huge red line for the international community and global leaders.
This guy is a failed comedian. But because his utterances suit the Western media's agenda, Sky News and BBC interview this chap frequently, as if he is some kind of geopolitical analyst. He claims to have better intelligence, better than the UK government or US government on Iran, even though he has not visited the country in the last 47 years. This chap even cooked up the involvement of Iraqis and Afghans against Iranian protesters. And if this was not atrocious enough, he claimed the Iranian government was using chemical weapons against protesters. Iranian government using chemical weapons is just like Saddam Hussein possessing weapons of mass destruction. And the Sky News presenter was like, yes, tell us more about this, instead of cornering this man for pushing unsubstantiated propaganda by asking for evidence. This despite the fact that a notorious Israeli propagandist on social media recently confessed to working closely with Iranian dissidents to fuel the recent violent protests. You can read her confession on the screen right now. What also makes the threat of another illegal attack on Iran imminent is the dangerous rhetoric adopted by UN Human Rights Council, a toothless organization which demonstrated utter cowardice even in the face of the worst Holocaust in our living memory in Gaza. This organization has suddenly found its courage back to attack Iran for human rights violations. And it's only right that we expose the shameful hypocrisy of this rogue organization and its equally rogue officials. Rogue because we have seen their sheer capitulation and even surrender to the Israeli masters in the recent past, particularly in the last 2 years. UN Human Rights Council held its emergency session today to discuss the gross violation of human rights in Iran. Their words, not mine. This body had created something called International Fact-Finding Mission on Iran in 2024 for a period of 1 year, but its tenure was extended to April 2026. Its core objective is to submit a report on the deteriorating situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Again, its words, not mine. Did this organization also create anything called International Fact-Finding Mission in Gaza to respond to the Israeli genocide in 2003? No. The only time it created such a mission on Gaza was way back in 2009, which ceased operations only a year later. As I said repeatedly in my last few videos, I would always stand with people who fight for their human rights against their governments, whether they are in Iran or in the US or even in the illegal settler colony of Israel. But I'm not going to turn a blind eye to the serious allegations of foreign interference by Mossad, CIA, and even MI6 in fueling the deadly violence in Iran recently. When these so-called protesters burn mosques, hospitals, and public buildings, you know for sure that there is a sinister motive behind such so-called protests. Causing unrest to destabilize a government has been a tried and tested tool for the US-Israeli spies. This is one reason why Arab countries agree to fall in line with the West, because they don't want any threats to their monarchies. So the UN Human Rights Council today began amplifying its campaign against Iran by pushing video statements of its key people. This is someone called Sarah Hussain. In her first few sentences, recorded perhaps from her Bangladeshi home, this so-called lawyer talks about serious human rights violations by using words such as troubling and torture and sexual violence. She then goes on to explain why there is an urgent need to act against Iran.
The fact-finding mission on Iran has been interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence. What we can already see is deeply troubling. The information we have gathered points to severe human rights violations, including disproportionate use of force resulting in arbitrary killings and injuries, torture, sexual violence, arbitrary arrests and detentions, and forced confessions. When we view these recent protests alongside established historic patterns of violations identified in relation to the Women Life Freedom protests, it is clear that there is an urgent need to act. The violations we have seen do not appear to be sporadic events, but widespread across the country and imposed in an organized manner. We must gather evidence and establish whether human rights violations and crimes under international law have occurred. Perpetrators and the state structures enabling the violence we have seen must be identified and held to account, and victims must receive urgent assistance and protection. It is only through accountability and breaking the cycle of impunity that such abuses can be prevented from occurring again. Recent events underline how critical it is for this cycle to be halted to prevent further escalation and more irreparable harm. International law demands that we take action to end the violations, protect those at risk, and forge a real path to truth, justice, and accountability for women, men, and children in Iran.
This Bangladeshi woman, also a Supreme Court lawyer in her country, is a member of International Fact-Finding Mission on Iran. I'm from South Asia, so I know a general tendency amongst members of elite class to go out of their way to please their white masters. For people like her, detecting brutalities in Iran, but not in Gaza, is a sign of a colonial hangover. People like her will agree to read anything from her teleprompter as long as it helps her get into the good books of her white bosses. It's mind-boggling to see such hypocrisy among people associated with a key agency of the United Nations. And why blame this Bangladeshi woman who may have been forced to issue such deplorable statements because of her inferiority complex? People like Sarah Hussain essentially bring disrepute to her country. But when UN Human Rights Council Chief Volker Turk too attacks Iran by calling out its alleged brutalities but refuses to name Israel while spelling out the war crimes in Gaza, this hypocrisy is ideological and born out of racism. This is what he said today.
I call on the Iranian authorities to reconsider, to pull back, and to end their brutal repression, including summary trials and disproportionate sentences. I call for the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained by the Iranian authorities. And I call for a complete moratorium on the death penalty. I urge the government to end the internet and communications shutdown.
He used the term brutal, accused the Iranian government of enjoying immunity in the past, and demanded accountability. Sounds very good. But tell me if he ever used these three words, just these three words, in one sentence or even in one video statement on the Gaza genocide. Let's examine that. This was him in July last year, talking about the Israeli genocide in Gaza and dehumanization of Palestinians at the hands of Israeli terrorists, backed by the wider West. And yet, see if Volker Turk used the words brutal and accountability and criticized Israel for enjoying immunity, just like he did today for Iran.
Every day, we are watching the unspeakable tragedy in Gaza and the West Bank with horror and frustration. Every day we see more destruction, more killings, and the further dehumanization of Palestinians. The people of the world will judge this conference on what it delivers. I call again for an immediate permanent ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages.
More than 600,000 people had been killed by Israelis till July last year when Volker Turk made this statement. What happened in Iran is unfortunate. Loss of a single life should be a tragedy. But what is an even bigger tragedy is when people whose job is to act as a moral police in such international conflicts display biases just because Israeli perpetrators are from the same race as they come from. In August last year, Volker Turk called Gaza a graveyard, and yet he never called for accountability for Israeli terrorists. Instead, he said Israel was in trauma because of 7th of October attacks. He left no stone unturned in literally justifying the Gaza Holocaust by Israel.
This is the gateway to a hellish nightmare. I cannot even fathom to think what people are going through on the other side. And then I see in front of me the lifeline that would bring relief and humanitarian assistance, which until now has not been enough, woefully inadequate. It is the most urgent plea to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza and to make sure that an urgent solution is found to silence the guns and to come to senses about what is happening on the other side. Killings and injuries of civilians have become a daily occurrence. Destruction of vital infrastructure, a daily occurrence. Devastating and reckless. Children shot at, hospitals bombed, heavy artillery launched on entire communities. All along with hateful, divisive, and dehumanizing rhetoric. I'm appalled by the disregard for international human rights and international humanitarian law by parties to the conflict in Gaza. There has been unconscionable death and suffering. More than 120,000 people in Gaza, overwhelmingly women and children, have been killed or injured since 7 October as a result of the intensive Israeli offensives. Since Israel escalated its operation into Rafah in early May, almost 1 million Palestinians have been forcibly displaced yet again, while aid delivery and humanitarian access deteriorated further.
Just see how many times this man blames Israel for the crimes against humanity that he himself is highlighting in this video. Zero. Instead, he goes on to perform a balancing act by reminding us about 7th of October attacks in a bid to almost justify Israeli barbarities. This man is the head of a top UN body. Forget Turk. Has the United Nations as an organization tasked the international fraternity to act against Israel or even impose sanctions on this rogue settler colony after it violated another international law by first banning UNRWA and then demolishing its headquarters? No. And UNRWA is a top United Nations agency acting as a lifeline for over 6 million Palestinian refugees across the Middle East. Israel has violated the existing ceasefire hundreds of times. This week alone, it murdered 3 more journalists, taking the number of those journalists killed by Israeli terrorists to over 400. And yet, Volker Turk and Sarah Hussein will not demand accountability or even sanctions for Israel. So you tell me why we must feel sad for the demise, practical demise of the United Nations as an effective global body, when this is how people like Volker Turk or Zahra Hussein or their colleagues are allowed to disgrace its sanctity. If anything, the United Nations should die as an organization. At least victims of atrocities, rogue and bully entities will not have any false hopes of justice. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent.
Welcome to Demystifying Iran. On Sunday, December 28, 2025, there were small protests in Tehran. The trigger was economic. The currency suddenly plummeted, prices soared. Some shop owners in central Tehran took to the streets, their frustration plain over the falling rial and rising inflation. There was no violence, no arrests. The government stated the demands were legitimate. What we did not know then was this: the collapse was engineered. The United States had manipulated the Iranian rial through the country's neighbors. But within days, everything changed. What began as a peaceful civil protest rapidly mutated into something else entirely, something monstrous. Police stations and military bases were assaulted. Buses, ambulances, fire engines destroyed. Hundreds of our police, our Basij volunteers, our Revolutionary Guard murdered. Schools, banks, mosques, clinics, public libraries, shops, markets set ablaze. Passers-by, innocent bystanders were executed at close range. Knives, swords, pistols. Men and women were surrounded, captured, and burned alive, beaten to death, stabbed, beheaded, shot. This was not a protest. This was a meticulously orchestrated campaign of brutal violence. This was a conspiracy against Iran. And the proof came from the conspirators themselves. From Tel Aviv, Mossad issued a statement in plain Persian, taunting Iran. Mossad is on the ground with the rioters. Former US Secretary of State and CIA chief Mike Pompeo tweeted and confirmed this, that Mossad agents were walking beside the terrorists on our streets. The Israeli regime's own Channel 14 laid it bare. They said that foreign regimes had flooded Iran with weapons, and that is why hundreds of our protectors were slaughtered. And Donald Trump tweeted to the rioters and armed men, "Help is on the way." When these statements are placed beside the images of targeted slaughter, it becomes clear who benefits from transforming peaceful protests into a bloodbath. Understanding this requires tracing a 47-year pattern, from the formation of militant groups trained and funded by hostile Western states, to targeted assassinations, to public blueprints for what they term soft war. The evidence reveals how Western intelligence agencies have, for decades, systematically exploited Iran's internal challenges. This is not a dismissal of legitimate grievances. It is an exposure of a deliberate strategy: create hardship, hijack protests, unleash chaos, and fracture national sovereignty from within. This is not a new playbook. We saw its softer face in the early 2000s, the so-called color revolutions. The script grew much more violent in Libya and Syria. What began as demonstrations were swiftly hijacked. Protesters were sidelined by militants. The countries were flooded with money, weapons, and foreign fighters. Libya was bombed into a failed state. Syria was plunged into a decade-long proxy war where terrorist groups became the tools for regime change. The result was not freedom, but unending catastrophe, the total destruction of a society. Now it's clear that the same framework has been established regarding Iran during the Netanyahu-Trump meeting at Mar-a-Lago over the new year. From the engineered currency collapse to the immediate influx of trained provocateurs, to the synchronized Western media campaign, to the overt US threats of attack, every piece fits. This was not spontaneous. It was a long-planned operation. The 1979 Islamic Revolution culminated in a definitive political transition. The subsequent trajectory of the Mujahideen Khalq organization, or MEK, constitutes a suitable case study in the formation of a Western-backed terrorist cult. When the popular political outcome solidified into the Islamic Republic, the MEK transitioned from a minor participant to a determined adversary. This shift was not reactive, but a prepared escalation. The organization systematically raided security installations to procure weapons and arranged external arms shipments through intermediaries in Iraq. By June 1981, it had transformed from a political faction into a full-fledged paramilitary force. From early 1979, the group framed the political contest as an inevitable civil war. Its leaders' declaration that they would answer a fist with a fist and a bullet with a bullet explicitly adopted a posture of violence. That posture was formalized on June 20, 1981, with their declaration of armed insurrection. Their operational phase employed targeted political violence to decapitate the emerging state. Assassinations targeted key religious and administrative architects. Terror tactics, car bombings, and mass street killings sowed fear and chaos. The campaign's most devastating single operation was the bombing of the Islamic Republic Party headquarters on June 28, 1981, which murdered 72 senior officials, including Chief Justice Ayatollah Mohammad Beheshti, crippling parts of the state's executive core. This atrocity followed an attempted assassination of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei just one day prior. Official estimates attribute the deaths of over 17,000 Iranian civilians and state personnel to MEK operations during this period. At the height of Saddam Hussein's imposed war against Iran, the organization formalized its status as a foreign proxy by securing his patronage and relocating to Camp Ashraf in Iraq. From this forward operating base, it provided intelligence and operational support to Saddam against Iran. This established a definitive treacherous precedent, an Iranian opposition group conducting armed operations against its own nation under the direct command of a hostile aggressor at war with it. During and after the war, the US, UK, Canada, and several European nations provided the group political shelter, hosting it under various front names. They then systematically removed the MEK from their official terrorist list. These were conscious political decisions made with full knowledge of the group's extensive record of assassinations and bombings against Iranian civilians and officials.
The United States is removing the People's Mujahideen of Iran, or MEK, from its list of terrorist organizations. The group supports the overthrow of Iran's clerical leaders and fought alongside Saddam Hussein's forces in the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s.
After heavy lobbying, I think a couple of years ago, the State Department reluctantly took them off the terrorist list. But they demonstrate, they basically fund a lot of politicians. They give a lot of money to politicians to come speak at their events.
Nowadays, the MEK is a friend of the West. And this is very peculiar. This is very interesting because the MEK, while also committing terrorist acts inside of Iran, they were also killing Americans.
The coordinated delisting had a triple effect. It empowered the organization by removing legal barriers, whitewashed its terrorist history, and facilitated new channels for financial and logistical support. The MEK's utility evolved. By the early 2000s, it had transitioned from a paramilitary force into a key intelligence and propaganda asset for Western and Israeli agencies, specializing in targeting Iran's nuclear program. The group produced and leaked fabricated documents, including forged satellite analyses, claiming to reveal a covert military dimension to Iran's civilian nuclear activities. The IAEA would later grudgingly admit these documents were likely forged. This manufactured intelligence, symbolized by its 2002 orchestrated so-called revelation of the Natanz facility, was funneled to agencies like Mossad and the CIA, then amplified globally to build a case for sanctions and war. Throughout this process, the MEK's clear agenda as a hostile actor was systematically downplayed. Its propaganda was deliberately rebranded as credible dissident evidence. This phase marks a critical evolution. The MEK was no longer just a militant proxy. It had been reforged into an information weapon. Its new mandate? To seed the narrative, to fabricate the myth of an imminent nuclear threat, to provide the pretext, the necessary lie for decades of sanctions, for isolation, for the drumbeat of war. And this model, this playbook of leveraging forged intelligence to justify foreign intervention, did not retire. It remained active. It was perfected. It set the direct precedent for what was to come. It became the blueprint for transforming peaceful civil protests into violent confrontation in order to make the case for war. The West's strategic rehabilitation of the MEK terrorist group established a destructive precedent. An Iranian opposition group is judged not by its adherence to democratic principles or domestic legitimacy, but solely by its utility to a hostile Western agenda. Its credibility is conferred from the outside, never earned from within. This strategy of cultivating internal agents extends far beyond exiled political organizations. It also actively exploits Iran's social ethnic landscape. Western intelligence services, primarily from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the Israeli regime, have systematically identified and armed separatist and militant groups as instruments of pressure. Among these, Kurdish separatist factions have received particular and sustained attention. Primary beneficiaries of this Western patronage is the Kurdish Free Life Party, Komale, and PAK, which are based in northern Iraq. They operate as direct proxies, receiving funding, advanced weaponry, intelligence support, and cross-border safe haven from Western agencies and their affiliated NGOs. Simultaneously, these same Western regimes grant terrorist leaders platforms on nationally and internationally broadcast Western-funded media networks. This serves a dual purpose: to internationalize their cause and to launder their image. The contradiction is stark. These are the very regimes that for decades have pretended to champion multiculturalism and tolerance. Yet in Iran, their operational objective is clear: to manufacture division, incite hostility, and fracture national cohesion along ethnic and sectarian lines. The strategic objective behind supporting these Kurdish and other separatist movements is unequivocal: to fracture Iran's territorial integrity from the periphery inward. By deliberately sustaining and escalating ethnic tensions, these external powers aim to force Iran into a perpetual security dilemma. They attempt to compel the state to divert immense military, intelligence, and economic resources to secure its borders, a constant and exhausting drain on national strength. This engineered internal fragility is synchronized with external economic warfare. While they attempt to stretch the state's resources thin by creating internal security threats, these same foreign powers deploy maximum pressure sanctions designed to cripple the economy and manufacture widespread suffering among the civilian population. The goal is a nation besieged simultaneously from within and without, its resilience systematically sapped on every front. Within this Western framework, historically unpopular political factions are systematically promoted, most notably the exiled royalist circle around Reza Pahlavi. His profound unpopularity is rooted in the brutal legacy of his grandfather and his father's regimes, which overwhelmingly Iranians associate with famine, the wholesale looting of national resources, Western subservience, and systematic state terror. Lacking any substantive political resume of his own, Pahlavi has further eroded his non-existent credibility through overt and desperate appeals to foreign powers. His widely mocked pilgrimage to Israel, where he was photographed wearing a kippah at the Wailing Wall, became a symbol of this subservience. His personal and family affairs have also been a source of public ridicule. This alignment, or more accurately, this allegiance, was not a one-time error, but a stated strategic cornerstone. At a Washington, D.C. press conference on January 16, 2026, Pahlavi explicitly cited his 2023 visit as the foundational step towards his current policy, a pledge to recognize the Israeli regime immediately should the Islamic Republic fall.
President Trump brokered the Abraham Accords, bringing peace between Arab nations and Israel. I see extending this idea to a free Iran through what we could call the Cyrus Accords.
Most critically, he has crossed a fundamental red line. Pahlavi has made explicit public appeals for the United States and Israeli regimes to militarily invade Iran, openly campaigning for a foreign war against the nation he claims as his homeland in the hope of being installed as its ruler. This has rendered him not merely irrelevant, but deeply despised, a treacherous aspirant to a foreign-imposed throne. Despite his profound and toxic lack of domestic support, Western and allied media persistently frame him as a legitimate opposition leader. This narrative is so artificially sustained that even Donald Trump, no subtle geopolitical analyst, has publicly questioned his actual support inside the country. The core operational logic of contemporary Western interference in Iran is hybrid warfare, the fusion of digital information warfare and physical violence into an interdependent system. Yet this model contains the seed of its own strategic failure. It is an engineered construct, fundamentally lacking the organic, sustainable momentum of a genuine mass movement. It manufactures a persuasive parallel reality online that remains decisively disconnected from the political and social facts on the ground. Within this framework, the armed element and the digital apparatus are two sides of the same foreign-minted coin. The armed element, reliant on Western-supported Kurdish separatists, Baluchi Takfiri terrorists, ISIS remnants, the MEK cult, and monarchist aspirants, creates tangible kinetic chaos, cross-border raids, infrastructure sabotage, and acts of terror designed to maximize societal fear and stretch state security to its limit. Simultaneously, the digital infrastructure and network of foreign-funded broadcast channels, troll farms, and algorithmically amplified influencers functions as the command and propaganda wing. Its mission is threefold: to incite domestic confusion, to weaponize every violent incident through layered misinformation, and to launder the image of discredited political proxies. The result is a closed, self-referential media ecosystem, a hall of mirrors where the manufactured narrative itself becomes the primary battlefield. This machinery has constructed a potent parallel world in cyberspace, a digital theater where Iran is perpetually on the brink of collapse, where exiled figures command phantom legions, and where the state is portrayed as hollow and universally despised. Algorithms amplify and entrench this narrative, forging an echo chamber that can appear overwhelmingly dominant to external observers and segments of the diaspora. Yet herein lies its fundamental failures, its existential disconnection from material reality. On the ground, there is no collapse. The critical sustained mass, the nationwide popular support necessary to transmute digital noise into revolutionary change, is clearly absent. The movement lacks what is indispensable: deep-rooted, indigenous leadership and a coherent, unifying political platform that resonates with the Iranian mainstream. Instead, it is perceived precisely for what it is: a patchwork of foreign-backed separatists, reviled monarchists, and terrorist cults, elements whose very histories render them politically toxic. Consequently, these campaigns fail by design. They're not organic. They are the top-down imposition of a foreign geopolitical script onto a complex society. They make a fatal error, mistaking manufactured trending hashtags for genuine revolutionary capacity. The ultimate hypocrisy of the foreign-backed campaign against Iran is not its failure to spark a revolution. It is its cynical success in achieving its true objective, the collective punishment of the Iranian nation. While media figures and exiled proxies loudly champion the Iranian people, their actions are calibrated to achieve the precise opposite. By fueling a cycle of manufactured violence and algorithmically amplified rage, they manufacture the essential pretext for tightening the sanctions noose, a regime whose explicit goal is to strangle the economy and induce such widespread suffering that public desperation can be weaponized against the state itself. Thus, the very unrest that fails to create an internal uprising is digitally repackaged to justify intensified external assault. The self-proclaimed liberators are in practice the architects of a more brutal siege. In this way, even in their strategic failure, they succeed in their tactical cruelty, inflicting profound and sustained damage. The broadcast studio and the rifle stock serve the same foreign master with a single goal: not to empower a people, but to break their will and fracture their nation. Yet they have failed. They will always fail. See you next week.
Historian and geopolitical theorist based in Beijing, China. He's also the founder and host of a widely followed and important YouTube channel called Predictive History. Thanks very much for joining us for the first time, Professor Zhang.
Thanks so much, Dimitri. I'm a huge fan of your work.
Thank you so much. First, I wanted to discuss with you initially when I reached out to you, Mark Carney's just completed trip to Beijing and also his widely discussed speech at Davos. But in light of events over the last couple of days, I've added to the agenda the looming attack, or what appears to be a looming attack on Iran. And I'm going to start with that subject. Before I do, I'd just like to remind our audience to like and share this video if they find it informative, and to please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already done so. So with that, Professor, I want to show you an excerpt from an interview this week of retired U.S. General Jack Keane. In this clip from a Fox News interview, Keane is asked whether he believes that an attack on Iran by the Trump regime is imminent, and this is what he had to say.
Sure. Okay. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, we're bringing these resources to bear, and it's likely because we had to expand the target set. And why are we expanding it? Because we had to consider, what is Iran going to do in retaliation? Our bases are vulnerable. What are they going to do about Israel? They're going to attack Israel? Likely. And they're vulnerable. And what are we going to do about their ballistic missiles? Are we going to take them down before they fire them at our bases and also at Israel? Likely. Are we going to kill leaders? Certainly. Our IRGC members, the people that are oppressing the people? Absolutely. So I think the target set is expanded. Resources are being brought in to deal with an expanded target set, which is what we do.
That's right, folks. That's what we do. Now, last week, Professor Zhang, you gave an interview, I believe it was on Danny Haiphong, in which you talked about the possibility of an attack on Iran. And you expressed the view, as I understand it, that the U.S. government would have considerable difficulty toppling the current government of Iran, and that it would more likely to turn instead to easy wins in places like Greenland, Canada, and Cuba. I'm curious to know whether, in light of what has transpired over the last 2 to 3 days, and in light also of retired General Keane's commentary, has your assessment changed? Do you think that an attack on Iran is not likely at this stage, or do you think one is virtually inevitable?
Yeah, so let me clarify my comments. So my feeling is that they will attack Iran. They will use airstrikes. It will be very impressive. They will hit a lot of military targets. It'll be very sustained. But airstrikes by themselves are not effective. And eventually, Trump's going to halt airstrikes and move his attention elsewhere. But then he'll resume airstrikes at a later point. So I think that this U.S.-Iran conflict will be in the background throughout 2026. Unless Trump is willing to commit ground troops, he cannot actually achieve any of his war aims in Iran. The regime is far too resilient, far too resourceful, far too cohesive. So that's what I meant. I do think that Trump will strike Iran because that's always been part of the plan. Remember, back in his first term, there's a clear trend towards confrontation with Iran. So Trump immediately withdrew from the nuclear deal. Then he transferred the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is extremely provocative. He initiated something called the Abraham Accords, which sought to bring peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And the most provocative thing he did, of course, was in January 2020, he authorized the assassination of General Soleimani, who was the Iranian de facto envoy in the Middle East. And that essentially is a declaration of war. So if he had stayed in office, then we would have seen military strikes against Iran. He lost in 2020, but now he's back in the second term. He is going to continue the policies from his first term, which is to seek regime change in Iran.
I would add to that list, by the way, and I'm sure you're aware of this, the recognition by the Trump regime in the first administration of Israel's theft of the Syrian Golan Heights. We could probably go on, but I think people get the picture. Now, Iran has long warned that if pushed, it's willing and able to close the Strait of Hormuz. If it did that for a significant period of time, let's say 6 months or even more, what would you expect the impact on the global economy to be?
So if Iran were to close off the Strait of Hormuz, it would really be the nuclear option. It'd be worse than a nuclear bomb because it would paralyze the global economy. So most of Southeast Asia, specifically China, Japan, and South Korea, depend on most of its oil and energy from the Middle East. And so if that were to happen, then these economies were to shudder and they would have to respond militarily, especially China and Japan. And so that really is the trump card that Iran can play. So I imagine that we still have pretty far to go in the escalation ladder before Iran plays that trump card. So I imagine what's going to happen. And it's just my best guess as to what's going to happen is that Trump's going to authorize airstrikes, and then Iran is going to retaliate against Israel because Israel doesn't participate in the airstrikes. Iran is also going to retaliate against local Middle East allies, including Jordan, and Iran will strike at U.S. bases in the region for its proxies, Hezbollah and the Houthis specifically. So I believe there's an escalation ladder, and we have to climb pretty far up the escalation ladder before Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. Because if they were to do that, this would basically be World War III. It would draw in a lot of nations, and the consequences it's not really contained anymore. It would be very unpredictable and unprecedented if Iran were to close off the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, a couple of days ago, a publication called Defense Security Asia published an article stating that there were unconfirmed reports, that's the way they described them, of a rapid Chinese military airlift into Iran involving up to 16 cargo aircraft. That would be quite a haul, potentially, of military equipment. What do you make of these reports, Professor Zhang?
Right. So from the Chinese perspective, what Trump is really doing is initiating a long-term strategy of strangling China economically. If you read the National Security Strategy, which came out last month, it's very explicit that the United States cannot challenge China in the Southeast Asia militarily. So what it's going to do is that it's going to use its proxies like Japan, and it's going to strangle China economically. Now, the problem with China is that its major strength is its exports. So if the United States were to close off the first island chain, right, which is Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and if there were a war in Iran, then China would be strangled economically because it could not access oil. So I know that Russia is providing 20% of China's energy needs, but 20% is not a lot. And the reality is that Russia is having problems meeting that demand right now. So it's going to take 5 to 10 years before the Trans-Siberian pipeline is online, and Russia can provide more energy to China. And that's why the United States is going to strike now. From China's perspective, I'm saying this from a Chinese military perspective, that the real reason that Trump is going after Iran is to destroy Chinese economy. So if you're China, you have no choice but to bolster Iran. And so they're going to send weapon systems, they're going to send financing, they're going to do whatever they can to support Iran. But there are some red lines. So China will not send soldiers, and China will not declare war on the United States.
Do you think that China might send naval vessels into the region?
Yeah, so the issue is that China doesn't have a blue water navy to challenge the American Navy, the blue water navy. But I think what's going to happen this year is that very quickly, Russia is going to transform its shuttle fleet. It's about 1,000 ships into a blue water navy. There's no way that Russia can defeat America in the oceans. But Russia at least has to challenge America. It basically has to create a war of attrition in the seas that would hamper America's aggression against Iran. And China would provide financing for Russia's blue water navy. So I think that's what's most likely to happen.
So let's turn now to a less violent topic, namely the subject of Mark Carney's much discussed speech at Davos. The most widely discussed aspect of this speech, I think, is Carney's acknowledgement that the rules-based order is, as he put it, a partial fiction. Now, he didn't that implies that some part of it was true, and he didn't tell us which part, if any, of the rules-based order was true or based on reality. But in any case, he went on to explain what he believed should replace the rules-based order, and he referred to this new foreign policy paradigm as values-based realism, which he said actually came from Finland's president, Alexander Stubb. And in the following excerpt from Carney's Davos speech, Carney explains what he means by values-based realism.
What does it mean for middle powers to live the truth? Well, first, it means naming reality. Stop invoking rules-based international order as though it still functions as advertised. Call it what it is, a system of intensifying great power rivalry where the most powerful pursue their interests using economic integration as coercion. It means acting consistently, applying the same standards to allies and rivals. When middle powers criticize economic intimidation from one direction but stay silent when it comes from another, we are keeping the sign in the window. It means building what we claim to believe in. Rather than waiting for the old order to be restored, it means creating institutions and agreements that function as described. And it means reducing the leverage that enables coercion.
Now, Professor, we just heard Mark Carney say that values-based realism means applying the same standards to allies and rivals. And I must confess that I'm deeply skeptical that Canada will now apply the same standards to the West's allies and rivals. And I'm going to give but one example, and that is within 48 hours of Carney delivering this speech, Israel murdered 11 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, including 3 more journalists and 2 more children. As you can see from this report by Thomson Reuters, I've seen no statement from any Canadian government official condemning or even expressing concern about these atrocities. They have been virtually silent the entire time that Israel has killed over 100 children in what is supposed to be a ceasefire. Moreover, after more than 2 years of genocide, Mark Carney's government has imposed no sanctions on Netanyahu or Gallant, both of whom have been indicted by the ICC. It has imposed no sanctions on major Israeli corporations, not even those in the military-industrial sector. It's imposed no sanctions on Israel's military leaders. But it continues to maintain sweeping sanctions on Russia and Iran, both of which it regards as geopolitical rivals of the West. So again, to be perfectly blunt about it, Professor, I think that Mark Carney's speech was essentially a marketing exercise. That's my suspicion, and I hope I'm wrong. He knows that the whole world now sees the reality of the rules-based international order, that it is a fraud and that the concept has been discredited. And therefore, I suspect, and I could be wrong again, that Western leaders want to rebrand their foreign policy as values-based realism, but there doesn't appear to be any meaningful distinction between that and the now completely discredited rules-based international order. So that's basically my skeptical view, but I'm very curious to know, what is your take, not just on this particular question, more broadly on Mark Carney's speech at Davos?
Yeah, so overall, I agree with your sentiment. I think you tend to be very right about these sort of things. It's better to be skeptical than it is to be naive, right? Mm-hmm. So I did read Mark Carney's speech, and he makes in his speech 2 major historical allusions. The first is to Thucydides, and Thucydides is writing about the Peloponnesian War, and the war was fought between Athens and Sparta. So Athens had defeated the Persians, and because of that, the Aegean Sea Greeks were very thankful to the Athenians, just as the Europeans were very thankful to the Americans for defeating fascism in Europe. And so after the Persian Wars, they created something called the Delian League. It was meant to be a mutual defense pact. But over time, Athens, as a hegemon, started to exploit its allies. It became a mafia regime, and it started to extort its allies. So, and then its allies had no choice but to seek relief from Sparta. So I think that with this Thucydides allusion, Mark Carney is sort of like hinting to his audience that we are at this moment when America's former allies have turned into their vassals. And so America is going to exploit us. America is going to steal our wealth. America is going to make us fight wars we cannot possibly win, probably in Ukraine. And so we need to band together and seek relief from another Sparta, today's partner would be China, right? So I think that's the first historical allusion he's making. The second historical allusion he's making, of course, is to Václav Havel's famous essay, The Power of the Powerless. And it's very ironic he does that because in his speech, he says that, okay, let's be honest. From day one, we knew this rules-based international order was a fraud. It was hypocritical, but we benefit from it, okay? Because we were friends of the hegemon, the great empire, and so we benefited. But now that the empire is turning against us, now that the empire wants to cannibalize us, we must now speak truth to power, okay? So you can imagine the hypocrisy. So I don't think it's much of a strategy, okay? Because I think like anyone with a brain, which obviously precludes Canadians, but anyone with a brain can see through the hypocrisy, the travesty, and the self-indulgence in his speech. It's not really a grand strategy. It's more of a lament, right? It's lamentation of, like we used to be best friends with America and we benefited a great deal. Now America has abandoned us. We're a jilted lover, and now we're forced to band together and seek a new ally in China. So I read the speech more like that. And he has like 3 grand suggestions for moving forward. The first, of course, is to speak truth to power, to recognize the severity of the situation and be honest with ourselves. The second is to create, as you say, a new system of rules-based international order, of institutions that could counterbalance the bullying of America. And the third is to rely more heavily on Canadian capital and talent. The problem in Canada, you know this, is that everyone's fleeing, right? Capital is fleeing, talent is fleeing Canada. So Canada's being hollowed out. So, as a banker, and, Mark Carney used to work for Goldman Sachs. He used to be governor of the Bank of Canada, and then he went to England, became the first foreign governor of the Bank of England. He is a banker who serves transnational capital. And the reality is that Canada, the nation, I hate to say this because I grew up there, right? But Canada, it's a toxic asset right now. Housing prices are like, sky high. The Canadian economy, 40% of the Canadian economy is real estate speculation. Canada is this glorified money laundering operation. It's lost all its legitimacy by supporting this genocide in Gaza. There are hundreds of thousands of homeless in Canada, yet Carney still continues to send tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine to fight a pointless war, causing about 1 million Ukrainians to die for no particular reason. These Canadian companies refuse to invest in the country, and many of them are fleeing the country. So Canada is a toxic asset, and what you do with a toxic asset as a banker is you sell it to foreigners. And who are the foreigners? The Qataris and the Chinese, okay? So that's the grand strategy that Carney has. And everything else, like this grand rhetoric about a rules-based international order, it's as you say, marketing. That's all it is, okay? Don't pay any attention to it. Watch what he does. So what he's gonna do is this. He's gonna call an early election, probably late spring, okay, April. He's gonna win by a landslide. He's gonna have a super majority. And then he'll start to asset strip Canada, okay? That's the plan. Pretty simple.
That's quite distressing for those of us who live here, but I find that an entirely persuasive prediction about what is likely to happen in the months ahead. Now let's imagine, Professor Zhang, that you were asked to provide advice to the Canadian government about how to deal with the current predicament. I know this is a huge and complex question, but I am curious to know how you would deal with it. Let me be clear. I've been complaining for years that our governments, successive liberal and conservative governments, have done so much to increase our dependency upon the United States and to deindustrialize this country, to deprive us of the capacity to produce domestically the things that are necessary for the well-being of the Canadian population. But this is the world we're now in. We have an extraordinary degree of dependency on the United States. We have a lunatic in the White House who openly talks about turning Canada into the 51st state. There's no way, even with the ruinous, plan to increase Canada's military spending to 5% of GDP, that we could compete with the United States in terms of military spending. We have the longest undefended border in the world with the United States. We're in a bit of a pickle. So in these circumstances, how would you recommend the Canadian government deal with the new reality?
Okay, so realistically, there's nothing Canada can really do to stop America from colonizing Canada. There just really isn't. And America doesn't have to use its military, because all America has to do is propose that Canadians can have American passports, and that whatever Canadian savings they have will be converted to American dollars 1-to-1. Okay, so Canadians are getting a huge discount. The reality is that 25% of Canadians are foreign-born, and most of them do not have any loyalties to Canada. Canada also has this bloated bureaucracy, federal bureaucracy, where 22% of Canadians work for the government in some capacity. Entrepreneurial energy is dead. If you're an entrepreneur, you are burdened by too many taxes, by too much regulation, and so you flee to the Americans. So if there were ever a referendum, you'd be surprised by the number of Canadians who vote to join the United States. I think the big vulnerability for Canada is Alberta. The Albertans are not very happy with the fact that they're basically subsidizing all of Canada. And the push for independence is now very, very strong in Alberta. And Trump can take advantage of that by supporting this push. So there are a lot of vulnerabilities in Canada. But I'll answer your question directly. Like, what would I suggest? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, first of all, the problem is that Canadians live in a bubble, and Canadians have an unfortunate tendency to put their heads in the sand at the worst times. And so the idea that government would actually bring an outside advisor who would tell them bad news, it's very inconceivable. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, just say that they bring me in and ask me what I should do, what I would do. Okay. And here's my advice. And I know this is counterintuitive, but my advice is Canadians should love Trump. They should make Trump into a god. They should have statues of Trump everywhere, okay? They should put Trump on TV all the time. In school, all Canadian children should love to worship Trump as a king. Forget King Charles. We don't want him anymore. We want King Trump to be the sovereign of Canada. And I guarantee you, if Canadians were to do that, all the problems would go away. And in fact, their lives would improve. But guess what? They're not going to do that, okay?
Well, no, that actually brings us to our next topic, which is Mark Carney's trip to Beijing. That doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that is going to win the goodwill and good graces of King Donald. But I want to get into the particulars of what happened there. When Mark Carney completed his meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping, he issued a statement, his government did, which touted what he described as a new strategic partnership with China. And I'm just going to put up on the screen here what I think is the most informative part of the statement. And I've highlighted in blue the only aspects of the agreements that were struck in China which translate into concrete improvements in the terms of trade between the two countries. I wasn't able to identify others. There were numerous agreements apparently which stated, the parties' commitments to various objectives and the goodwill and their hopes and aspirations. But the actual meat on the bones, this is what I was able to identify. And I'm quoting, "To help deliver the full potential of these partnerships and build up our domestic manufacturing sector, Canada will allow up to 49,000 Chinese electrical vehicles into the Canadian market with MFN tariff rate of 6.1%. This corresponds to volumes in the year prior to recent trade frictions on these imports, representing less than 3% of the Canadian market for new vehicles in Canada." I believe the number for 2024 was somewhere in the range of 28 million vehicles sold in Canada. So this is a really small proportion. It is expected that within 3 years, This agreement will drive considerable new Chinese joint venture investment in Canada with trusted partners, protect and create new auto manufacturing jobs, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes on and says, I should also just specify that in this paragraph, it's stated that it's also anticipated in 5 years, more than 50% of these vehicles will be affordable EVs with an import price of less than 35%. Somewhere else I read that half of this very low quota is for vehicles less than $35,000. And from what I understood, the rest have to be at a price point above $35,000. In any case, it goes on and says, agri-food and trade are foundations of a longstanding relationship between Canada and China. And Canada expects that by March 1st, 2026, China will lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed to a combined rate of approximately 15%. China is a $4 billion canola seed market for Canadian producers. And this change represents a significant drop from the current combined tariff levels of approximately 85%. And Canada expects the Canadian canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas will not be subject to relevant anti-discrimination tariffs from March 1st, 2026, until at least the end of the year. So that's 10 months. Now, all of this strikes me as rather modest, Professor Zhang. I don't see this as being any profound change in the trading relationship between Canada and China. I guess I would concede that it is a significant improvement, and I certainly would love to see Canada pursue closer relations in all aspects with the People's Republic of China. But I don't see this as being a strategic partnership. And I'm curious as to your thoughts as to how important this actually is. And also, secondarily, how you anticipate that the Trump regime is going to respond to this.
Right. So I would say this is a breakthrough. And I would say this will lead to bigger strategic partnerships very quickly down the line. Okay. So like there are different aspects to what's going on. The first aspect is that Trump has basically declared war on Latin and South America. Okay. So you have countries like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico that are not obeying him, that are not being sufficiently differential to him. Okay. Now, Brazil exports a lot of agricultural products to China, especially soybeans. And Trump is angry about that as well, because remember when Trump imposed tariffs on China, China responded by cutting agricultural imports from the United States, which hurts farmers in America, which supposedly hurts the MAGA base. And then China started to import a lot of agricultural products from Brazil. So what Trump wants to do is basically strangle South America and prevent trade between China and South America, which forces China to look for agricultural products in North America, United States, and Canada. Okay. Also, if there's a war that breaks out in Iran, then China needs oil, and so China is now forced to buy oil from Canada and the United States. Okay, so that's one element of what's going on. Okay, that's number one. Number two is we have to remember what the Canadian economic model is. Okay, there are three pillars to the Canadian economic model. The first is sell resources to America. 77% of Canadian trade is with America. Okay, that's number one. Number two is exploit cheap immigrant labor. Right? Canadians don't actually work. They get immigrants to do work for them. I know this because my dad was a dishwasher and had two managers who were Canadian, okay? That's number two. But number three, which people don't ignore, is money laundering, okay? Help corrupt officials from around the world launder their ill-gotten gains into Canadian real estate, okay? So the very important idea is these EVs that are coming into Canada, they're meant to be the spearhead for this massive collaboration between Chinese companies and Canadian companies, which allows Chinese companies to launder resources into Canada. So it's money laundering, okay? That's one aspect. But the other aspect is this. Look, I keep on saying this, but Canada has become a toxic asset and where real estate is completely overpriced. And so they're trying to dump this toxic asset onto the Chinese, okay? So what Carney really wants, okay, this is key, is access to the household savings of the average Chinese citizen, which is about 40%. So in Canada, Canadians, the average Canadian household has about 100% debt to income ratio. Okay, so basically Canadians owe more than they actually earn. But in China, Chinese will save 40% of all their income. That's a huge financial resource for Carney to tap into. Okay, so what Carney wants, he doesn't care about the EVs. He doesn't care about selling canola to the Chinese. Who cares? That's opinions. What he really wants is a new economic relationship between Canada and China, where the Chinese households are able to divert a lot of their savings to Canadian resources. Okay, so imagine Chinese buying houses in Canada. Imagine Chinese sending their kids to Canada for university. But also imagine Chinese through stable coins buying Canadian currency. Okay, so that I think is the grand plan. Because again, Carney's a banker. He thinks like a banker. He thinks about how to package a financial resource and sell it really expensive to stupid investors. Okay, that's how he thinks. So I think that's a grand strategy here, and Trump's going to go along with it because this for Trump is really the ideal arrangement between China and the United States as well. So let Carney test the waters, see how the Chinese respond, and then when Trump visits Beijing in April, negotiate the same deal.
And do you think the Chinese government appreciates fully that this is the long-term strategy of the banker?
Okay, so the decisions are not usually made. I'm talking like high-level decisions are not usually made between government and government. They're usually made between central bank and central bank. Okay, so the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, that's a coordinating body of the central banks. Okay, and that's where they come together and they discuss their problems and the solutions. So the Canadians have a problem because it's entirely based on money laundering. It's a Ponzi scheme. So they need people to come in and store their resources in Canada. Okay, that's how the thing works. The Chinese have a problem because their people refuse to spend their money. Okay, and Chinese refuse to spend their money because Chinese have absolutely no confidence in the future. There's no safety net. The pension is not reliable. Their children is not going to have a great future. So they need to save us up as much money as possible for the future. But the problem from the economic perspective is that's actually counterproductive. You need people to spend their money for the economy to function, right? So the money is staying in the bank dormant. That creates a lot of issues. And one major issue is, of course, trade imbalance, where China has like 1.2 trillion trade surplus with the rest of the world, which is just it doesn't help the Chinese at all. Okay, so the Chinese central bank has a problem of like how to increase consumption. The Canadian central bank has a problem of how to absorb more of savings from around the world. Okay, so I think that these guys had serious discussions at the Bank of International Settlements. And they've come to an agreement, and that's why Carney went to Beijing. Okay, because remember, there had to be an agreement in place for these leaders to meet. The two leaders meet in order to sign the MOU. They're not going to sit together for like days and days to negotiate the deal. That's what underlings do, okay? So I think there's already been an agreement in place, and how this agreement will pan out is something that we will observe over the next year.
Now, I want to focus on one particular aspect of this agreement, and namely the electrical vehicles. I happen to drive an electrical car, but it isn't a Chinese-made one because it pretty much is inaccessible in this country. So now the BYD vehicles will be coming in. Based on what I've heard about them and read about them, they're going to be extraordinarily attractive, probably to a lot of consumers in this country. And assuming that the quota doesn't get in the way, one could easily imagine a very rapid increase in the sales of Chinese EVs in Canada in the months and years ahead. Do you think that there's any prospect of Chinese automobile manufacturers moving production or some part of their production to Canada in order to avoid the destruction of the domestic automobile industry, or is that not the way they operate?
I think that's the plan. I think that's the agreement. I think the agreement is for Chinese EV factories to move over to Canada and create joint ventures. Okay, so the Chinese political system, it's very strange for Westerners. So EVs, it's not an economic tool; it's a political tool. And what I mean by that is, think of the 2008 Beijing Olympics, where the government spent billions and billions of dollars on creating this amazing show for the world. And so it's a political show, okay? And that's what EVs are. EVs are a sign that China is technologically advanced, that it's not just like a sweatshop to the world, that it is one of the leading technological centers of the world. And it's all part of China's like grand strategy to be a technological powerhouse, okay? So, so the problem with EVs is that they're heavily subsidized by the government. So people don't appreciate this, but EVs lose money, okay? Because they're all heavily subsidized by the government. And there's overcapacity in China. So like everywhere you go, there are lots of EVs, but they can't actually sell all the EVs in China. So for Canada to start selling EVs, for Canadians to start buying Chinese EVs, for Chinese EV companies to open shop in Canada, it would be a huge political victory for the Chinese leadership, and that's all they care about.
Let's talk about another sector, telecommunications. You know, when Mark Carney concluded this trip, the neocons in Canada started freaking out. And one expression of that was this article in the Hill Times, which is a go-to newspaper for Canada's political elite. It's based in Ottawa. And as you can see here, the Hill Times went to security experts, or at least that's the way they describe themselves, including a former director of CSIS Canada spy agency, and also to politicians, and asked them about Huawei. And there's a ban on Huawei's 5G in this country, and they warned ominously that we should not lift that ban, and continued to express hostility to this extraordinary corporation. What do you think is going on here, Professor Zhang? Why is the Canadian political and economic elite, and particularly the security establishment, so hostile to Huawei? I mean, they claim that it's potentially a vehicle for the
Yeah, that was great. All right, so let's get going. Larry's got a great website, sonar21.com, and we always come on. I go there all the time and check out the great articles. And here's one that's interesting because, you know, when these things happen, you know, a lot of people around here go, well, Russia, China, they're not doing anything. Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, they're all the way on the other side of the world, and it is not easy. And they're not built to project their power. Their militaries are defensive militaries. Their militaries are local militaries, the traditional kind of military, which is to protect your border, not to project power all over the world. But Larry has looked into this, and he's going to tell us how China has silently responded. Larry, fill us in. What happened here?
Yeah, so let me put the caveat on this. This was reported originally in South America. It was double reported by RT. And I've not seen anything in Western media to confirm it. So I put it with that caveat. If true, this is what China did. They held an immediate meeting after the kidnapping of Maduro. And is coming out of that meeting on January 4th, the first thing they did was, and that, you know, that would have been Saturday, because, yeah, right. I'm just trying to get the day straight.
Right, that's right, because it was Friday was the night they did the kidnapping.
Yeah, so as soon as it happened, that they started on the 4th of January, the People's Bank of China said that they were going to suspend all transactions in U.S. dollars with companies tied to the U.S. defense sector. Okay, so that would affect people like Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin. Then reportedly 2 hours later, 2.5 hours later, the State Grid Corporation of China, which is a power grid, announced that it was going to review all of its contacts with U.S. suppliers of electrical equipment. Now, that's the one that gives me some question about, was this legitimate? Because my understanding is that most of the transformers and different components of electrical equipment are actually being produced in China, not in the United States. The third element was that the state-owned oil company, China's state-owned oil company, was going to change its supply routes and to start diverting away from the United States and going to other countries. There's also trying to ban Chinese cargo ships to avoid the use of American ports. Now, I'm not sure how much material is offloaded at American ports by China. I do know that a major destination for them is Cologne Free Trade Zone in Panama. But you know, if all of this is true, it was China, instead of coming out, and they did actually publicly condemn the U.S. action, but they didn't make a point of focusing on this. And the last element was that the cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, is something that China has been working on for several years. It's to be integrated in part of BRICS. And what it is it's basically a digital platform for moving money from one country to another, one company to another. And, in the past, the common way of, if you did a wire transfer, such was using SWIFT. And the United States banned Russia from SWIFT in late February, early March 2022. The problem with SWIFT is basically SWIFT is like sending you an email saying, "Hey, Garland, I'm sending you $10. Go ahead and credit your account with $10." Well, what happens if I get lost in spam? And you don't find out for 2 or 3 days, or you actually inadvertently erase the message and never find out that you had the money. That's the basic problem with SWIFT. It's using pre-digital technology, or let's call it 20th century technology, email. Well, here's CIPS, which is basically it's a cyber tool. It is digital. It is instantaneous. So, and best of all, the United States doesn't control it. China does. So if you've got money wanting to send it somewhere, you don't have to go to the United States as a gatekeeper. You go to China. So we take all of these together. It looks like China has looked at the attack on Maduro, seen the United States action as a direct assault on China, because some of the Trump people have not been shy about saying that this is to prevent China from getting a foothold in Central and South America, which again I find laughable, because China's had more than a foothold there for more than 25 years. I know Panama intimately, and I was working on product counterfeiting investigations back in 1999. So
Wow.
here we are 27 years later, and all the 3 ports at the north end of the Panama Canal in Cologne, Panama, were all managed by the Chinese. I did some compliance programs for a couple of the casinos in Panama City. And the Chinese were all over. I mean, they love to play baccarat. So, most of the clientele was Chinese. This is 27 years ago, for God's sake. So this notion that China is some sort of just lately said, "Oh boy, we're gonna take over the world, and we're gonna start with Central and South America." No, it's ridiculous. They were buying some oil from Venezuela, but the problem with the Venezuelan oil is to produce a barrel of Venezuelan oil, let's say that the Permian, the oil that comes out of Texas, let's say you can produce that at $48 a barrel. Well, the Venezuelan crude costs probably $15 more than that, say $63 a barrel. So depending upon what the global oil price is determines whether or not you can produce Venezuelan oil at a cost-effective basis. So it's not like it was a critical resource for China. Plus, to refine this particular kind of heavy crude, you need specialized oil companies or refineries. Well, we talked about this last time. The guy that owns the 3 of the refineries that do that, and for each barrel of oil, that refinery is going to earn between $15 and $20 a barrel. Okay, that's Paul Singer, his Citgo. He's got 3 specially designed oil refineries that fit that bill. Well, let's say you're refining $1 million, a million barrels of oil. Just do the math with, times 10 or times 15 and do that on a daily basis. All of a sudden you're talking some real money. This is why it's worth billions of dollars to Paul Singer, who is contributing money to Donald Trump.
It doesn't seem like it's of great value to others. Apparently, a lot of the oil companies have said due to the, high production costs, due to you can't necessarily guarantee us. There's a lot of armed people in the country. They may be pissed and start shooting at us. We're not convinced that we can safely send people in. You've got a security issue. You've got the issue with the oil. You've got infrastructure issue. It's just not economically feasible for a company to just say, okay, we're going to go in there and start pumping oil. So that doesn't necessarily work. And to me, the Trump administration, they had no right to do this. I am completely opposed to it. And I also think they didn't really have a plan afterwards. I don't know what they're doing. One day they're on the phone with the president or the CIA person's there and they're leaving. I'm not convinced that they have much control of the country. If they had control of Venezuela, why would they wouldn't still have to keep swiping grabbing the oil tankers, because they'd be in control of where the tankers are going. The fact that they keep grabbing tankers shows that they don't have any control over the country whatsoever.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And folks watching or listening need to understand the difference between, let's say, the Permian oil in Texas and the oil coming out of Orinoco in Venezuela is the difference between get a cup of coffee in Texas and suck your coffee through a straw. And then take that same coffee cup down to Venezuela, fill it with peanut butter, and suck the peanut butter through the straw. A little different. A lot more work. Your jaws are going to get tired. So, and that's why ExxonMobil looked at it and said, hey, look, it'd be one thing if we were looking at $100 a barrel for oil, then good. They could pull it out of the ground. They could refine it, and they might make some money off of it. But where oil is right now, around $60, so that you can't make money off of that at all, because that eats up all the cost. Let's say that they can pull it out of the ground for $40, but they're still going to have $20 additional cost in terms of getting it refined so it can be used.
Yeah, there's just no money in that, and all the other issues combined, you know what I mean? And you got to make an investment. Let me add this. If I'm thinking long term and somebody says, well, put a couple $1 billion in the oil fields. Again, you've got security issues and other issues, but here's the other thing I got to say. Man, we're sitting on massive bubbles right now.
Yes.
If I put X amount of $1 billion into this figure, and I'm going to do that, and then we get another 2008 style crash, or let's say it ain't even that bad, but we get some kind of a recession, the price of oil is going to continue to go down during a recession because there's less demand. So even if I put money in it, if I'm looking on the economic horizon, why would I put money in that when I don't have any way to look forward and say, well, the U.S. economy, the European economy is going to improve and the price of oil is going to go up. The future says it might go down. So I know I'm not putting money in it. Heck, I won't be able to sell the oil I got now if that happens.
Yeah, actually, the oil futures might be a good one to look at to predict what's going to happen with respect to Iran. Will there or will there not be another U.S. attack on it? I believe there will be. And Iran, I believe, is likely to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Well, if it does that, that is going to disrupt 45% of the world's daily consumption of oil. So that's significant. So that would, send the price of oil skyrocketing. So if you see a lot of people starting to make the bet that the price of oil is going to go way up, that could be another, if you will, warning indicator that something bad is getting ready to come down the pike.
Well, that would be not a very wise politically for Trump. I mean, geez, during a election year, if the price of oil goes through the roof, which will tank our economy. I mean, if it goes through the roof, it'll tank our economy. There'll be layoffs. Who knows what'll happen? He's done. If he does that, he's done. If gas, people wake up tomorrow and gas is $5.50 a gallon or something crazy like that. Diesel fuel $6 a gallon, which means everything goes to the market in the back of these diesel trucks. You know what I mean? These diesel box trucks and tractor trailers. Now the price of eggs and everything else doubled. If that happens, Trump's finished. It would be political suicide, wouldn't it, Larry?
Yeah, no, I agree. The other problem, the sort of either choice that Trump makes in this has got some political peril for him. Let's say that because, look, the amount of oil they pull out of the ground, they're around 700,000. But let's take it. Let's say they get 1 million barrels a day. Well, that's right now the total world oil production per day in terms of barrels per oil is about 45 million. So if Venezuela is doing 1 million a day as a percentage of total global production, that's about 2%, a little more than 2%. That's nothing. But let's just assume that you can get the oil, you increase the supply, which then lowers the price of oil. The problem or the danger there is for these oil producers in the United States who are doing fracking, that could make their oil no longer competitive. It would be they need to have a higher price for the oil in order to make money off of their bet. So that's what I say. There's a lot of 3D chess going on here, and I'll guarantee you, I think Trump can barely play checkers.
What are your thoughts about the whole Davos thing yesterday? Trump gave a really, sometimes I don't know. He sounded a little deranged. He's talking about Iceland, and I don't know what the heck's going on. I keep saying this. I report on politics, so I pay very close attention to Trump his first 4 years. Whatever you agree with him or not, he was sharp. He was sharp. He was quick. He was witty. He was on top of things. Policy is some people will like his policy, some people won't. But I was watching Trump, and I was like, man, he's quick. He's sharp. He's thinking quick. Now, he didn't do these and he rambles and he goes all over the place. And it seems like, it's like all about him. I don't know what the hell's going on with Trump, but it seems like he's losing it, Larry. And that Davos speech was craziness.
I agree. It is. I've likened it to, the role Dustin Hoffman played in Rain Man. You're just talking sort of a monotone without a lot of voice inflection. When you're talking without any inflection, any emotion, and then, if we don't, we got to protect Iceland. People are going, what? I thought it was Greenland. Iceland, Greenland, who cares? And he also came out again yesterday with Azerbaijan, wherever the hell that is. Last I heard, it was supposed to be Azerbaijan, but So I think I wrote a piece earlier in the week where I maintained that Trump is showing the medical symptoms of dementia as measured by a phenomena or a symptom called confabulation. And confabulation means when you say something as a fact and you really believe it's true. I mean, not, you don't, there's a difference between, that you're lying. It's like, if you have a wife that's a little heavy and she says, honey, do I look fat in this dress? When you say no, you're lying.
Right, right.
Okay. and as a smart husband, you do that to survive. But when you start saying things like, I settled the war between Pakistan and India. I settled the war in Rwanda. And all these countries are going, what? You didn't know such thing. But he really believes he did it. And that is a sign, one of the early signs of dementia. So I really think that's what we're looking at. Now, you come back to the Greenland. I'm as puzzled. So if you ask, why did we do Venezuela? I think we did Venezuela to make Paul Singer rich. And then he in turn will make Donald Trump rich. Every other reason that was offered was just gaslighting. That we had to stop the drugs coming out of Venezuela. Go back and read the State Department annual report on drug trafficking. It's called INSCR, INSCR. 99% of the fentanyl that's seized is coming across the Mexican border. 1% is coming across the Canadian border. Okay, so the stopping the flow of cocaine and fentanyl into the United States, that wasn't the real reason. It was a made up reason. We need to get the oil. The oil is so we can affect the market and bring the price of oil down. Again, they account for really less than 2% of global daily production, and what they do produce is very costly to refine. So it's not the oil. The oil is not going to make a bit of difference to what U.S. voters pay at the pumps come November. And then you could say, well, it's to keep China, Russia, and Iranian influence out of this hemisphere. Well, that could be a part of it. But I come back to the more practical. It's the money for Paul Singer. So do the same analysis for Greenland. What the hell? Okay, we've had carte blanche since 1951. So what is that? 75 years now. To go into Greenland and do whatever we need to do militarily to keep NATO strong. There has never been an instance that I can find in the last 75 years where either Greenland or Denmark told the United States, hey, screw you, buddy, you can't come into our country and do that, just stay away. No, none of that. But by God, we got to stop Russia and China, who are keen on taking over Greenland. You go, what? Russia already has, if you measure control by how much of its land mass borders the Arctic, Russia's got 53%, more than half, already covered. And it has 10 nuclear-powered icebreakers, 30 conventionally powered icebreakers. And they can go anywhere they want or need to in the Arctic. Whereas the United States only has one functioning icebreaker. It has one other one, but it's broken. Now they've contracted. They're supposed to get a new one from Norway in 2 years, and the rest are supposed to show up in either 2029 or 2032. So the U.S. is nowhere near ready to actually try to exploit that place economically. And then we hear this red herring about, got the rare earth minerals. We've got rare earth minerals here in Florida. I keep saying this over and over and over to people. They're right, they're literally a 25, 30-minute drive from my house. The problem is that the United States doesn't have the means to process the material that produces the final product for what we know as rare earth minerals. The only country in the world that has that capability on an industrial scale is China. I guarantee you that they've talked about the rare earth minerals in Venezuela as well. You know, that's a crock. And the same for Greenland. Nonsense. Even if you dug them out, you got to process them, and that means take them to China, maybe. So this is nothing more than a Trump power play, and they're creating this red herring that the Chinese, if we don't stop it, the Chinese and Russians are going to grab it. You know what? Russia's already the #1 country in the world in natural resources. It doesn't need to go into Greenland to grab more.
You know, it's interesting you say confabulation, because I had a brother that passed away a couple years ago, and he had retired military. When he was in the military, he had retired because he was in a tank that went over a cliff, smashed his head in, and he had a big plate. And then he developed a tumor the size of a lemon under that plate. They had to cut that out, and he had brain tissue, right? So he had retired, but he had some issues, and you could tell most of the time he was okay. But sometimes it's interesting to use that confabulation.
Yeah.
You could tell he couldn't tell the difference between fantasy and reality at times. So exactly what you're saying. Like, he may say he did something or something happened and you knew it didn't happen. But and you know what I mean? But it's like he couldn't tell the difference whether it really happened or not. Like, he really might have believed it happened, or he'd just say it happened. Sometimes he'd say things, and it was, you know, he had basically part of his brain had to get cut out during an operation and severe head injury, and it left him, you know, with some issues. And so I know the exact thing you're talking about, because to me, it's a person who loses, you know, if I tell a lie, I know it's a lie. But it's a person who loses that wall between what's real and what's real, and they may tell a lie, and you know it's a lie, and they should know it's a lie, but you could tell they really don't.
Yeah, I mean, when once you sort through it, and that he genuinely believes that. Now we got related to that. We saw this week with Cy Hirsch's latest Substack article, and look, I love Cy. I've known him for 45 years. I do consider him a dear friend, but that's why I'm speaking out. He was talking to someone he described as a Trump official, and I took it to mean it was somebody from the intelligence community, specifically the CIA. And he was basically telling them that, oh boy, Russia's losing the war. Russia's economy is crumbling. Putin's not able to withstand to defeat the West. In fact, he claimed that cell phones and internet were down last weekend in Russia. And I'm going, what the hell? So if this CIA dude is they're telling Trump the same thing, it's not so much that Trump is believing something is true when it is not because of a mental defect. He's believing something is true that is not true because he's being lied to. That's a whole different matter.
Yeah.
And so I can't, so when we're looking at what's going on in his brain, trying to sort out, those two causes, and they're not mutually exclusive. They could coexist.
Businesses are reeling and shops are closing in Moscow and throughout Russia. I've been in Moscow and I've been in throughout Russia.
Yeah,
right?
Recently, you might add.
And but it's just the opposite. I mean, that looks like some crap that I would read in the Washington Post or New York Times. The Russians are fighting with shovels, and they're being rolled over by the Ukrainian troops who are taking town after town. Remember this one? Human wave, the Russians are just being wiped out. Oh, this is my favorite. He left this out. The Russians are eating each other. They're starving and they've resorted to cannibalism. That's what that is. He might as well put in there that the Russians are resorting to cannibalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and I sent him a note, and he's not happy. But Scott Ritter also sent him a note, and Ray McGovern sent him a note. And the sad fact of the matter is, back in the day when Psy was in full capacity, he would not accept if I claimed something. If I told him, "Hey, the sun comes up in the east," he's not going to take my word for it. He's going to go get it verified and have that fact corroborated. You want to make sure his credibility was at stake. But now he doesn't have anybody to do that function for him. He's putting out some just outlandish nonsense. And this latest one is a case in point where he insisted that the cell phone and internet in Russia was shut down over this past weekend. And I'm going, what? I wrote him. I said, "Si, come look at my phone. I'll show you the different people who live in Russia that were texting me and sending me emails over the weekend." So if the internet's shut down and cell phone services shut down, how the hell was I getting such messages?
He's got Putin is facing unrest. More Russians are against the war than support it. That's not what I saw. That's not the people I talked to. The army is losing respect. Those are some of the most patriotic people on earth. They are volunteer. I went and visited the volunteers. Volunteer people are doing things, putting together these care packages and stuff for the soldiers. It is one of the most patriotic places on this earth. And the stuff that I'm reading there, I'll put it like this. More Americans are against the U.S. being part of Ukraine than to support it. More Americans are against the Israeli and us and their money going. I mean, if he said Israel and the United States in there, and he said that Trump is facing unrest because of the Israeli policies, oh yeah, but that would be true. But that's just something I'd read in one of these, the Atlantic Council or something like that. Usually,
Well, yeah, and actually, two of his sources that he cites about how bad the Russian economy is. What side doesn't tell you, the credentials that he cites sound impressive. It's not until you go read Scott Ritter's rebuttal to Psy that you learn that these two people are Ukrainians who have left Ukraine, but they are virulently anti-Russian. So they're not showing up with an objective analytical bent. They have an axe to grind.
Yeah, it's not professional. It's not what you'd expect. It's just simply to write an article, and that would be like, if somebody from the CIA came and said, "Garland, I got information, here, write this," and it was all the Russians are stupid, they're losing, they're going down, Ukraine's winning, all that. I'd say, dude, I can read the Washington Post anytime I want. I can't write another story like that. If you want a story like that, I can read one in the Washington Post every single day. Every day I can turn on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow to tell me everything in that story. To me, it's like this. You don't even need to do that. You're just redoing what they do every day. Why would you put your name on that side? Rachel Maddow gets paid specifically to do that. And we know, okay, that's Rachel Maddow. It's expected. It's her job. That's what she's going to do. But to put your name on, he besmirches the long history he had with the My Lai massacre, with Abu Ghraib. He has a long history of doing incredible work, and he besmirches his name and his own legacy by putting out this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I hate to see it. It hurts me to see him do this.
I know. I'm with you. It's sad, but I've likened it. I wrote an article late last week about Donald Trump and liking it to, anybody that's had an elderly parent, particularly over the age of 80. There's come a time where you had to take the car keys from them. Just tell them, hey, you're not driving anymore. You're done. Your time as a licensed driver is over. And frankly, I think that time has come for Psy as well. He no longer has the critical thinking skills to check himself. It's when they tell you, hey, the internet service was dead in Moscow over the weekend. It's very simple. Hey, let me call a couple of Americans. Because what I told him in one of my notes, I said, "Look, I'm in touch with a retired American military officer who was he graduated from West Point, and he was the president of the Russian club when he was there. But he's Russian Orthodox and has moved back to Russia for religious reasons. I got another young man out of Illinois. He's over there playing their version of professional football, and I'm not talking about the one you kick around with your foot. I'm talking about the actual American football.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, he's a big boy, so he's a lineman. They put him up front; he can plug a hole. Then there's another fellow who was born just about 3 hours up the road from me here in Florida, and he used to be involved with movie production out in Hollywood. But he and his wife, who is Russian, he became very involved with the Russian Orthodox Church, and for religious reasons, feeling that the better environment, they moved there. So, and then they got Stanislav Kripivnik.
Yeah.
He's a former. He was going to be promoted to Army Major, but he was a captain in the U.S. Army and served in a variety of locations. So all psych, he could have talked to any of them. Said, "Hey, I'm getting this report that your internet's out." Well, the mere fact that he could contact him would show him, "Oh, that's not true," because I'm talking to him. Okay, so there are things that Psy could have done to have verified these facts that he didn't do. And as such, it's just he's going to end up looking very, very foolish and tarnishing his legacy.
Oh yeah, it's obvious that. What are your thoughts on the issue of the power grid? It seems as though the Russians have made a decision that, for whatever reason, where they are in their overall plan as part of their military strategy now, they've cut off the Russian power, and boy, is it looking bad in Kiev. I'm seeing stuff on Telegram, and I'm like, oh my, everything's frozen, pipes frozen, people frozen, bundled up together like puppies. I mean, people leaving the city by the hundreds of thousands. What's Zelensky? How long can they continue with this charade?
Well, they can't. They'll. That's what I say. I think this new strategy that Russia is now implementing of taking out these locations and basically turning the lights off across Ukraine is going to compel Ukraine to have to surrender much quicker than would have been if they weren't doing this. Because what was it the other day? Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, announced 600,000 had already left in the last 3-4 weeks. Yeah, that's a substantial number of people, and you're getting that outflow in other places. The other major towns: Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and then of course Kyiv. So this war is winding down much faster than most people had expected, or at least what the mainstream media is telling you is going on.
It looks another one. What's it? Hemingway. Where was it? What the guy said? How did you go broke? And he says slowly and then suddenly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. They said that the claim is that the Russians' internet is down. Well, it's over there. Last week, my Verizon phone went down. Coincidentally, at the same time, I thought it was a coincidence. I'm like, well, wait a minute, and I did a video and I said, I think there's a connection that they took on the same day that they took Starlink down. That Verizon's, all these Verizon phones went down all over the country, dead for like 24 hours. There's nothing they could do. I did a search. Here's what I searched. Does Verizon use Starlink? Here's what the AI said. Yes. Verizon customers can use Starlink-based text messaging service, which became available in July of 2025. Verizon does have a direct partnership with Starlink for satellite services. I suspect that when the Russians shut down Starlink in some way or another, because if you can use your Verizon, apparently I was looking it up, there's some kind of a special SIM card you have to get, something else, and you can use your Verizon phone to text. So it would seem to me that the Russians would say, well, if we're going to shut down the terminals, we sure can't have people using their phones to get the Starlink.
Right.
And I suspect that Verizon, I knew it when it happened. I'm like, well, the Russians just shut down Starlink and Verizon goes down at the same time. And now I find out that Verizon uses Starlink. I suspect there's a connection, Larry.
Yeah, that may have been what actually happened in Russia. Instead of just a cross, they shut down Starlink. And it doesn't affect most Russians because they're using phones that are not dependent on Starlink.
Yeah. And if you got Verizon, my Verizon phone went, and everybody I know that had, and it just said SOS. You couldn't do anything. And that was from 12:30 in the afternoon until like 9:30 the next morning. And even then when it came back on, it was fluttering. It was on, it was off. And last week, my internet service for Verizon wasn't right. It's just starting to smooth out this week, really right. So I think there was some kind of attack to shut down Verizon because they were using it as with Starlink as some kind of a weapon. What do you think about Iran? Have you heard anything else about the nature of these the protests and what happened? And is that all over with?
Yeah, it's over. I listened to Professor Morandi and Nima yesterday. Normally I do two. I talk to Nima on Monday and Friday every we'd had actually a week off because of the internet was down, but he's now able to go to the Press TV studio and talk from there. But both Nima and Morandi were saying yesterday that things have returned to normal. There are very, very few protests out there. Are there people still angry with the government of Pezeshkian for failing to be a good manager and to address the economic problem? Yes. But that doesn't mean that they are upset and wanting to overthrow the Islamic Republic. That's not the case.
It seems to me that it was kind of like, okay, first they kind of did like it was a planned thing, like they did kind of an attack on the currency to destabilize the currency, and then they put their spies in to do the Soros style, color revolution protests, and then like that was supposed to peak out, destabilize things, and then they were going to come in and bomb then, and somehow they always got a plan that never works. That was just going to change everything, and now that their original part of their plan has died, I don't think they're like, well, we still may bomb them, but what would be the point? Even then, it would be madness. But even now, when your whole plan is falling apart, so what do you just go in and bomb for the hell of it now?
Yeah. Well, in fact, let me add a couple more components to that. Okay. So it got launched. You're absolutely right. It was launched on December 28th to create a crisis that would get people in the streets blaming the government for financial mismanagement. All fair. But prior to that, in the weeks prior to that, the United States, MI6, Mossad, one or more of these Western intelligence agencies were busy working with and shipping in Starlink terminals that then went active all across Iran. And let's remember, Iran is 4 times the physical size of Iraq. So once they got those all up and active, they then had communication nodes throughout the country that they could give directions about what to do. And they also provided some weapons. Could be easily explained away as weapons that the local Venezuela or that the local Iranians had kept at home. So once the protests started, then as they followed in Maidan and back in Ukraine in February 2014, they had these I'll call them agitators and instigators go out and start shooting and killing people in the crowd as if they were getting killed by Iranian security services. And then they were also killing members of the Iranian security services. The numbers there I've heard are well over 2,000. So you can just imagine, 2,000 people in that 1 week. That's more people, security person in 1 week than died in the entirety of our time in Iraq. or or in Afghanistan. We never had more than 2,000 killed in Afghanistan, as I recall. I think the number in Iraq was more like 4,000, but still, so it was violent. But what happened? They then discovered, with the help of Russia and China, the electronic warfare that was being carried out, being used to coordinate these attacks, being used to disseminate information. They turned down the internet. Once the internet went down, the rioting died off. And both Nima and Miranda yesterday were saying, nothing's happening here.
Yeah, it sounds it. So now well, what do you think about this? These reports that they're still more bombers, that they're sending more ships, are they valid? Do you think they're still thinking about an attack? What do you think? I mean, it seems like it could be catastrophic if they attack.
Yeah. No, I'm with you all the way, brother. Yes, Trump has not told them to put on the brakes, turn around, go back to port, go back to your base. Nope, they're flowing them in. And I think they're going to, I think they believe their own nonsense, that they can actually really destroy the Islamic regime and force a collapse. They did it in Syria, but again, in Syria, they did it because they bought off the army. I do not believe that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard command has been bought off and will betray the Ayatollah. Not at all. So, but we'll see.
And it took 12 years in Syria. They started 2011. It didn't happen until like 2024 or something. It took like 12, 13 years. And the Iranians right now, it seems to me that these attacks that they've waged have only caused the Iranians to really circle the wagons rather than turn against their government. They may be unhappy with one thing or another, economic issues, but it seems to me that they're just going to fight harder if you attack them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely. In fact, there's some belief that the attack that was carried out on June 13th, 2025, was made possible because Trump was talking to the Iranians and talking through Witkoff to the Iranians and putting out the message, hey, we're going to get together and negotiate peace, or you got this 7-day deadline. And then even before the deadline was up, we sucker punched him. That's all.
Right.
So Trump didn't play fair. And what he's up against now are Iranians who feel betrayed. But they're going to get their revenge the old-fashioned way. They're ready to fight. They're not unprepared. They're not lulled into complacency.
And they've said it's all-out war. Now, in the past against Israel, they basically said, we held back. We fired missiles, but it appears to me that for war, they have other allies in the region that could attack U.S. bases. I mean, if it's all, we don't know, until you push somebody in the corner, you don't really know how hard they would fight. If you have a country that says, okay, you're trying to destroy me, they got nothing to lose at that point.
Well,
we don't know what level of ability they have in the region that they could use. I mean, we know some things they have, but they couldn't. Isn't it possible they could have far more things that arrows in their quiver, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, and there have been a few videos surface online about the storage underground of various Russian missiles, and it's an impressive amount. The notion that they've just got 2 or 3 that they're running short is simply not the case. So I think you're going to see them continue to make preparations. They've got Russia and China in their corner this time. They didn't have that in June, and that was the fault of Iran, the Iranian government, Pezeshkian's government. They basically rebuffed Russian offers earlier in 2025 to have a security arrangement with Ukraine. No, Ukraine was, with Iran, and so instead of that, Russia and Iran having that relationship, Iran. It was after the 25th that Iran went back sort of sheepishly to both Moscow and Beijing, saying, "Hey, can we remember that offer you had on the table? Is this still viable?" And it was. So they've been rebuilding and repurposing. So they're not going to get caught unawares this time.
What areas do you think? Certainly ISR, but maybe targeting locations of ships, submarines, or whatever, other things that they would be able to use through Chinese and or Russian, say, space-based technology for targeting things like that.
Yeah, well, and actual S-400 air defense systems that are deployed. During the June 13th to June 25th attack, the 12-day war, there was only one S-400 in Iran, and that was located at this nuclear power facility in southwest Iran. And that was the Russians were manning it because the Russians had several people that were working in that industry. So that, that was one of the U.S. and Israel shied away from attacking that.
So now, well, and I would imagine a lot of Chinese stuff coming. The other thing is, there could be other, in the same way that you said the Chinese quietly and subtly, shall we say, took actions.
Yeah.
Iran could be something much less subtle. And I don't mean violent. I mean, they could say, okay, we're not selling you the following things. They could say, we're turning our ships around. They could do something that could really smack our economy pretty hard. At the same time, we get smacked pretty hard by these missiles. This thing, I just look at it and I'm like, the U.S. has been screwing around with a lot of countries. One of these days, they're going to punch the wrong guy.
Well,
And,
yeah. I mean, look at it. Iran is in a position now; it can shut down the flow of oil, Strait of Hormuz. That the oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf accounts for 45% of all oil production, both OPEC and non-OPEC. So, imagine the impact of almost 50% of all the oil that's needed around the world is no longer available. What does that do to economies? Well, that's going to create a real bad situation.
And you just don't come out of that. I mean, you can try to pull out of that. We've decided even if you do, I mean, at that point, once you start that downward spiral with an economy like ours that's already in question, in a way. Well, Larry, I certainly appreciate it. Let me remind everybody again, and that is, let me show you the website where you can go for all your information.
Cufford, follow me.